Hello and welcome to my 1000 subscriber special. Reaching 1000 subscribers was a very big milestone for me and something that I was very happy about. I'm very happy that you are all part of this channel. I'm happy that we have such a nice and healthy community here on this channel, but also in the game Through the Ages in general. And in anticipation of this very special occasion, I gathered a team of 10 of the best Through the Ages players in the world to take part in a very special project that I called the 10-Headed Hydra. And what is this all about? Basically, I played a game against Majondor and DANeo, two very strong players, and every time it was my turn, all 10 participating players of the 10-Headed Hydra, including myself, suggested a turn that they would like to go for. I also shared all relevant informations like about my military cards, etc. After all of those 10 players have submitted their suggested turn, then one random turn of those was chosen and got played, and then that was just repeated on every turn. And after the turns were submitted and the turn got chosen, then there was also some room for discussion and maybe yeah, just name some arguments for the different lines that were chosen. So that was the idea behind this, basically seeing when you're in a specific situation, how would maybe some other very strong players play a specific move? How many different lines will the top players can come up with, or will there be a lot of agreement? Maybe there won't be a lot of variety, maybe there will be a lot of variety. Those were very interesting questions or thoughts that I had, and that I maybe wanted to see tested with this special project. And when I asked for players and asked if maybe some of the top players want to participate, I was very happy that we indeed gathered a team of some very, very strong players. You can see here that we have Irene, who is at the moment the second highest rated player in the world. He also won the international championship once. We have the international championship winner Watsinius, who is in the third position at the moment in the click rating. We have the current reigning world champion Marta Pecheur, who also won the Intermezzo championship multiple times. We have the two times international championship winner Cengisip. We have myself, the world championship of 2020, world champion of 2023. We have Dyron Tropy, who won the Intermezzo championship and also at the moment shows off some very strong results in the transcontinental ladder. We have PV4, the runner-up of the last year's World Championship, and also just at this some days ago, he actually won the international championship, won the Intermezzo championship, so also an absolute top player. And then we have Lambda, Funestus, and Wolves, who I think didn't win a very big title yet, but also all have a very strong rating, all played already in the Grandmaster division, and have shown that they are some very strong players. So I just gathered some of the absolute elite players of this game to take part in this project, which I was very happy about. But also the opponents that we are playing against are some very strong opponents. We have Majondor, who won the international championship in the season before. That one was won by PV4 now. We have DANeo, who is maybe a little bit more for two-player specialist. Had some very strong results in the times where there were a lot of games played in the Through the Ages pools, but also had already appearances in the Grandmaster division, in the Intermezzo championship, and also is just a very strong player. So we have two very strong opponents in the game and a team of 10 very strong players. And that was a very special project that I was looking forward towards. As I said, when all players suggested a turn, a random turn was chosen. That was something where I thought about how I wanted to do it the best, because I thought maybe it could be nice to then take the turn that was chosen the most often. But I think the more the game goes on, the more variety there will be in the turns, and then it is actually not that easy to choose which is actually the turn that maybe got chosen most often, because maybe the most players wanted to go for iron but had a lot of differences in the last civil action, and then there were maybe 3 or 4 players who want to go for alchemy and had a very specific turn, and then the alchemy turn maybe was was the one specific turn that got chosen the most often, but actually the majority wanted to go for iron, which is why at the end I just thought, let's just pick a random player whose turn will get submitted, meaning that if there is a majority turn, a good chance is that this majority turn that was chosen by the majority will be chosen, but there's also the chance for maybe some little bit more niche plays to be chosen if the randomizer, the Wheel of Doom as we called it in this project, if that is the will of that Wheel of Doom. Alright, now without further explanation, we will hop into the game and see how this project went off, and I hope you're interested to see which different turns did the players come up with and how did it all work out. Alright, so let's hop right into the game. Alright, one thing that I of course completely forgot to mention is that one of the opponents in this game, DANeo, actually recorded videos of each of his turn that he played, and that was definitely very great that there was already some coverage while the game was ongoing, and if you are interested to check that one out and maybe want to see Danieo's perspective of the game, definitely check out his channel. You will find it linked in the description of the video, and but of course there was, as in his videos, there were, for example, his military cards already seen, but there was a gentleman agreement between all of the participants that they wouldn't take a look at his videos, and I also trust all of the participants that they didn't take a little look at the military cards. I think that should be clear, and also generally there's a lot of information that I will try to bring into this video, and so that will be very difficult. It's definitely possible that I will miss out on some stuff and some turns that were maybe suggested and some arguments that I maybe have forgotten about. So if maybe some of the participating players will watch this video and at a specific moment notice that I completely missed something, or that maybe how I present it is maybe a little bit can also be seen quite differently, then definitely they are all welcome to write a comment and maybe share their perspective on specific situations in the game. So I'm very excited how this will all be going. I have definitely prepared some notes, and alright, but now without further ado, let's start with taking a look at the game. And first of all, we will take a look at the leaders and wonders. We can see that there is the internet together with Pierre, so that is an interesting combination. We have Hollywood together with Joplin, Marlene Dietrich and Fleming, so definitely a lot of theater and culture synergy in H3. We also have Shakespeare and Gaudi in H2, but no Bach. We have Churchill for the military, the Manhattan Project. There's no Gandhi in the game. We have Einstein for a little bit of science synergy. There's also the space flight in the Manhattan Project. In H2 we have the Suez Canal and James Cook, so a colonization game could definitely be possible. We have Maria Theresa but no ocean liner service. We have the railroad but no James Watt. We have Catherine and Napoleon for some military action leaders. In H1 we have the two science wonders with Silk Road and Universitas. There's also the Forbidden City. We have Great Wall and we have the Machu Picchu. We have both of the military action leaders in H1 with Joan of Arc and Jan Žižka. We have Nostradamus and Barbarossa to help with the strength. We have Eleanor, Isabella, Barbarossa who can maybe work nicely in a colonization game. And we have Leonardo for some lab and printing press synergy. Alright, Majondor is in the first position, and he knows that there will probably be some interesting leaders to pick for him anyway, and he just makes the decision to take the pyramids, which I think is a very good decision for him. And when I saw how this game started, when I opened the game for the first time, I was already very happy to see how this starting situation is for us. Not necessarily because we maybe have some strong options, but because I think it's definitely not like there is a very clearly best option in this situation, meaning that there maybe are already some different turns that will be suggested, because I was fearing that maybe for the first few turns there could just be some very straightforward lines and we would just have full agreement in the first turns. But like this, it's actually the question. There's Hammurabi available, there's Confucius available, there are two yellow cards available that could both be taken, and so it was for me already not really that easy to come think about what do I actually want to go for the most. And we actually had already quite some different turns that were suggested. The one clear tendency was that most of the players, 7 out of the 10 Hydra heads, valued Hammurabi the most. 7 of them picked Hammurabi, 4 of them picked Hammurabi with the Urban Growth. That were Irene, Wozniacki, PV4 and Funestus. Those went with Hammurabi in Urban Growth. 3 went with Hammurabi in Richland. Those were Chengisib, Lambda and Wolves. And yeah, so Hammurabi was the leader that the most of the players valued the most. It was an interesting decision here between taking Urban Growth or Richland, because I think generally in this situation the Urban Growth might be more valuable, because when we take a look at the remaining wonders, we have the Hanging Gardens, Colossus, the Acropolis, all maybe not wonders that don't necessarily need to be rushed, meaning that maybe getting a bit of additional science instead of resources early, and maybe also allowing to get into a technology earlier, like iron for example, could be quite valuable. So I think the Urban Growth looks like the better card to pair with Hammurabi. However, there's one argument to go for the Richland that also were voiced or named by the players that choose the Richland line, and that is that when we here go for Hammurabi and Urban Growth, we definitely have to expect that DANeo will go for Confucius and then either Stonehenge or Engineering Genius. And then if this Urban Growth is taken, it means that Caesar will drop down to 1 civil action for Majondor. And if the Richland is taken, Caesar stays on 2 civil actions. Meaning that with taking the Richlanders just basically means that Majondor definitely won't go for Caesar, while with taking the Urban Growth the door is definitely open. And I found it very interesting that Chengisib, who is known as a very military heavy player and maybe quite often just goes for Caesar himself, he went with the Hammurabi Richland line and mentioned that he just wanted to be a bit safer from Caesar. So he of course knows what maybe a good military player can do potentially with him, and wanted to be a bit safer behind and with taking the Richland. But we also had some other players, for example PV4 thought he, with having Boudica maybe as an alternative, would definitely not go for Caesar. Boudica and Pyramids, just a very strong opening, and Caesar player that just brings a lot of variety and RNG with him. So yeah, then there were just some players who maybe weren't that afraid of Caesar. But of course, those 2 lines weren't the only ones that were chosen. There were actually 3 more turns that were suggested. Were 2 Confucius turn, one by me. I went with Confucius and Urban Growth here as my pick, and Martha Pêcheur, the world champion, went with Confucius and Richland. So we both wanted to have Confucius. It was a very, very close call for myself, but I thought that with those wonders that could be coming out of the deck, maybe you don't necessarily want to build them early, but if you don't have your wonder available to build early, then it can be difficult to use the additional civil action of Hammurabi quite nicely. Maybe there are some interesting cards to take, but if not, it can be a bit awkward. Maybe you have to just take a bunch of cards, have a relatively full hand. Maybe you can just start building on something like the Hanging Gardens anyway, but I just didn't like it that much, which is why I thought some additional science could be nice, and I think I would have liked to take Hammurabi in the Urban Growth, but then I was actually a bit afraid of Majondor going for Caesar. It can definitely be a bit annoying, and I thought maybe then it would be a bit safer to actually go for Hammurabi in Richland, but with the Richland we don't have any additional science early on, and then with those wonders that don't necessarily want to be rushed in the mix, I just didn't like the Hammurabi in Richland pick that much, and at the end went with Confucius. I then went with the Urban Growth. I think here the Urban Growth is maybe the less good yellow card, because with Confucius you have some additional science, probably you want to build a mine first anyway, and then you get the resources earlier. However, with going for Confucius ourselves, and then with very likely DANeo going for Hammurabi, I thought that then it could actually be quite nice to lure Majondor into going for Caesar, because with having Confucius, I think it could be a lot easier to respond to maybe some aggressive Caesar blade, and for DANeo who would have Hammurabi, so I wanted to lure Majondor into Caesar to maybe cause some trouble for DANeo if he wants to go for Hammurabi. And Martha Pêcheur went with the Confucius and Richland line just because maybe skipping the lab for a while could be fine, and then the additional resource from the Richland, having that early, could just be quite nice. But then we also had one more turn that was suggested, and that turn was suggested by Dyron Tropy, who wanted to go for Stonehenge here. Definitely maybe a little bit of an unusual pick. I think the reasoning here is that there are still some interesting wonders coming down the road. For example, there could be Boudica, however, it could be that with the Stonehenge is taken, then you will just go for Hammurabi Engineering Genius, then Boudica will be available for Majondor, meaning that he could maybe take her away, and then there's Ashoka still available. Or actually, will Ashoka be discarded then? Yeah, I guess Ashoka will be discarded in Majondor's turn, so it could be a bit tricky on what leader to get potentially. So if maybe at the end Stonehenge and Boudica is what will be available for us, then I do think that could be definitely a very, very solid opening. But I think for me personally, just getting one of those extremely strong leaders plus a yellow card was too much value at the end. But the Stonehenge might be the potentially best wonder for us. The other wonders are maybe not that interesting. So a lot of thought already for the first turn, and I was very happy because a lot of discussion was already going on after the turns were submitted, and at the end the Wheel of Doom was rolled and the turn of Irene, the highest rated players, got chosen, and that meant that we at the end went with the Hammurabi and Urban Growth pick. Now DANeo has to decide. He definitely wants to go for Confucius here. Does he want to go for Engineering Genius or the Stonehenge? And with Confucius, I think the Engineering Genius is probably the best pick. With going for Hammurabi, I think Stonehenge could be considered a lot more, because I do think that's a very nice combination. And that was also one of the reasons of the Hammurabi players, that I didn't want to leave DANeo the Hammurabi plus Stonehenge combination. That can just be very powerful, having additional civil actions and additional science, and then being able to do a lot of stuff with those things. Yeah, now DANeo can't go for Hammurabi. Stonehenge will go for Confucius and Engineering Genius. Now the very interesting question was to see, will Majondor go for Caesar, or will he maybe go for a bit more safe Boudica pick, just getting a strong economic leader? And as you can see here, Caesar falls down to one civil action thanks to us taking the urban growth, and Majondor indeed will go for Caesar, elects him, builds a mine and increases his population. Definitely also there was some discussion about, do you really want to go for Caesar here when there's also Boudica available? But yeah, Caesar is a counter against Hammurabi and Confucius, so definitely a good situation. And also a reason that was named by Lambda was that it will be a video that a game that will be seen on YouTube. Very special game, no tournament game, so why not just go for maybe a little bit more of a fun line that definitely can also be very, very viable against those two leaders. So Majondor here goes for Caesar. And actually the first card that got revealed out of the HA events that still stayed in the deck at the beginning was the Colossus. It was a tiny reason why I wanted to go for Urban Growth and Confucius, because maybe there was a chance that either the Acropolis or Colossus could drop down to one civil action, and now the Colossus actually drops down to one civil action, and again we had to see what turns will there be submitted for now the second turn. And the main question was this turn, of course, what wonder do we want to go for? And we had a relatively high agreement that probably it has to be that we have to go for the Colossus here, because 7 out of the 10 participating players suggested a turn to where the Colossus was taken. I was also one of them. I think when playing against Caesar and Confucius, we have to expect the event deck being flipped extremely quickly. Caesar can maybe go for some annoying stuff if he maybe gets the military technology early, so the Colossus makes us a lot more safer. And if we build it, we are also very nicely prepared for quite a bunch of those events that could be in the deck. Additionally, there is a Suez Canal and James Cook in the game, so maybe the additional colonization force could still be quite nice to have at some point. Maybe Caesar just wants to seed every card that he gets and would be willing to seed some colonies, but maybe with having the Colossus we could have some chances to win a colony at some point. So I do think the Colossus is a pick that I'm definitely agreeing with. However, we had also two players, Wolves and Iron Tropy, who made the decision to rather go with the Hanging Gardens, maybe liking that wonder a little bit more. The additional happy faces can definitely be quite nice, can also be helpful to defend against a potential military push from Majondor. And so we also had two Hanging Gardens player, and then the Irene, whose turn were taken at the round before, actually suggested to just skip the HA wonder, and he wanted to go with the Great Wall first, a wonder that definitely has a lot of potential, maybe also a wonder that is a bit expensive to build, doesn't help as quickly as the Colossus maybe, but he thought maybe with Warfare and Great Wall we should also be in a very nice situation. And so that was also one line that was chosen by the top rated player. And then there were some other questions that needed to be answered, and it was whether the lab should be built first with the urban growth or the mine. And here I actually went with a line where I went with the Colossus and built the mine first. And my reasoning was that with Caesar and the Confucius, the event deck might be flipped that quickly that maybe the additional resource could make a difference between being able to finish the Colossus a turn earlier or not, and it could be very viable if indeed the event deck should be flipped to maybe have this nice way to get some additional strength going. However, looking at this turn again in hindsight, I think I'm happy that at the end the turn that got chosen didn't build the third mine and instead the second lab, because we will see that the additional science will just be extremely valuable. There are still some chances with all of those developments that the Colossus can be finished relatively quickly if there are development of markets and then either crafts or trade routes revealed. Then the Colossus can still be finished very quickly. And so 7 out of the 10 players went with building the lab first, only 3 with the mine first. I was one of them. I had one match with PV4 who also went for building the mine first and the Colossus, and then I think we had also one of the Hanging Gardens player, the Dyrantropy, who went with the mine first, but the majority decided to go with the lab first. And then one other thing where I was curious to see how the players will decide is whether to use Hammurabi's military action for civil action, because the problem is if you're Hammurabi and you're playing behind Caesar, if Caesar has drawn 2 aggressions and you draw only 1 card, Caesar can go for a guaranteed double aggression, and you always have to think about, do you want to take that small chance? It's only a small chance, only about 5%, and I do one of the aggressions, the kidnap, doesn't really do a lot, so it's even a little bit less high, and with that also the majority of the players wasn't willing to miss out on Hammurabi's ability and went with only 1 draw, but 2 players, actually the 2 best rated players, Zinyads and Irene, made a decision to rather just not use Hammurabi this turn and get 2 draws going instead. At the end, the Wheel of Doom was rolled again, and this time Lambda's turn got chosen, and it was basically the majority's turn. The majority wanted to go with the Colossus, the majority wanted to go with the lab first, and the majority wanted to use Hammurabi's ability, and at the end, that is maybe the turn that is the most representative, so a good choice by the wheel. Then we draw our first cards, it's the Crusades. Now it's DANeo's turn. He will go for building a mine, increases his population, takes the urban growth, and as you can see in the row, there are not only the Great Ball, but also now the Universitas coming down the row, and with that, he just makes the decision to rather wanting to go for the Universitas first, instead of just going for the Hanging Gardens. Then it's Majondor's turn. He seeds, opens the development of trade routes, and then will offer a naval trade agreement to DANeo, wanting to offer DANeo the additional colonization force, maybe indicating that so far he didn't have any additional colonies drawn, or any colonies drawn that he wants to go for, but DANeo rejects the pact. Majondor then makes an interesting choice with going for the printing press. Maybe there's just not a lot else that is interesting for him to take. Doesn't build the printing press directly, which he could have done. Instead builds a step of the pyramids. Maybe wants to be prepared to potentially take one of those wonders. Also maybe just wants to get the civil action going first. But after having finished the pyramids, he has now the option to go for the printing press. There are Shakespeare and Gaudi in the game. There's the Hollywood Fleming in the game. So definitely some synergy for the printing presses. And he made a decision to pick them here for 2 civil actions. Now it's the first time we also have an event in hand, and from that point on we basically had to do 2. All of the players had to suggest their submit their move 2 times. One time they had to share if they want to go for using their politics phase or not. And after that was decided, then again the action for the turn got submitted, because the turn of course changes whether the Crusades are seeded or not. So a player who wants to seed Crusades of course can't plan the turn without knowing what event will already be revealed. However, this time we had full agreement that the Crusade shouldn't be seeded, because if we seed the Crusades and then want to use Hammurabi, we again have only 1 card in hand and would again be in danger of a double aggression, and I think that alone is reason enough to definitely not seed here, and that was also the complete agreement by all participants. And this turn already was a little bit tricky, and it was a bit a question what to do, because it's really the question how to use all of the civil actions of Hammurabi very nicely. And yeah, there were maybe two main different lines that were considered. 6 of the players went for the iron, and so that was one thing that got picked by a lot of players, just maybe securing that copy of iron and allowing an option to upgrade the economy nicely. However, 4 players made a decision to not wanting to commit 3 civil actions into taking the iron, and instead went 3 of the 4 went with the reserves, and 1 actually with the frugality. That one player was Irene, so Irene already showcasing some uh, special moves, or some moves that weren't chosen by the majority, maybe already showcasing that he's seeing some things that the others maybe don't, or just valuing some things slightly different. Also, it was interesting this turn that the 4 players that chose to go with taking a yellow card were, at least at a point when this decision was made, now it's already different, so it also doesn't really mean anything, but those 4 players were actually the top 4 rated players, while the other 6 players went with the iron, so that was the only time, I think, in the game where there was such a clear um, um, correlation between those two things, but I don't think it has to mean anything. It's probably just completely random, and also now already the ratings have changed again. So, but it was interesting to notice that at the time when the move was played, I was also one of those players who made the decision at the end to take one of the yellow cards. I went with taking the reserves, but it was a very close call. I definitely considered going for the iron here. Thought about if maybe that could be nice. However, with there being the potential that with Caesar and Confucius, maybe the event deck will be flipped quickly, a lot of developments will be revealed. I just thought I didn't want to commit 3 civil actions into the iron, maybe wanting to stay a bit more flexible, maybe being in a better position to potentially build up some military in case it will be needed. Also, Wartsinians, who was one of the players who took the reserve, just wanted or just mentioned that he, in this position with Caesar and Confucius, really rather wants to set up for a bit of more for military game instead of an economy game, that he would feel himself a lot more better if we went in such direction. The players that went with either reserves or frugality then built a mine, took the warfare and increased the population, so just securing the warfare. The third military action at some point could be nice, especially maybe with the Colossus draws, also to defend potentially. But the 6 other players went with the iron, but then after spending 3 civil actions to take the iron, there was definitely some variety on how to play the last 2 civil actions. 3 of those players went with building a mine and increasing the population, so just building, getting the production going, increasing population. 2 went with building the mine and taking the warfare, wanting to take the iron, but also the warfare. Going for both of those things might be a bit costly with the science though, but the warfare could still be very important to have. And 1 player, I think it was Lambda, went with the decision of increasing population and taking the warfare, and with that allowing the option to maybe build an iron mine directly, which is definitely a very interesting option to think about. However, if the event deck will be flipped quickly, maybe there could be some turns where the Colossus needs to be finished before going for the iron, and then it could be a bit bad having delayed the iron, build the bronze mine, but still saving a civil action with building an iron mine directly. Definitely something to consider in the situation. So we can already see for the first few turns a lot of variety in what the top players suggested. Definitely no agreement at all. At the end, the Wheel of Doom was rolled again for turn number 3, and Funestus' turn got chosen, and that is one of the iron turns. He went with building the mine, taking the iron, and then taking the warfare, having this military tech available, having the iron to upgrade, and also already built the 3rd mine here. Also, with taking the warfare, and I think that was even something that maybe Funestus mentioned, the Great Wall will be discarded, maybe making it that Majondor doesn't go for a big military push, as taking the Great Wall won't be an option for him. But he already invested some civil actions into the printing press, so it will be the question if he actually wants to go for something like this. DANeo seeds and the development of markets are revealed. We can already see that with development of trade routes and markets being revealed, there are actually now already enough resources to finish the Colossus at the next turn, even with having built a lab first. And I do think the science is extremely valuable, so I think it was nice that the wheel chose building the lab first earlier instead of building the mine first. Definitely a turn that I maybe would have misplayed a little bit, at least with how the events were revealed. I think maybe if the event deck flips quickly, but some of those resource developments stay in the deck. It could have been nice to build a mine first, but at the end I think I agree. I think the science is too valuable, and the chances are that maybe the Colossus can be finished quickly anyway. DANeo goes for the Universitas here, which makes a lot of sense, gets a very strong first wonder and takes the second copy of Warfare. Majondor this turn actually offers a trade routes agreement to us, and now again we had of course to think about, do we want to accept it or reject it. 3 players, and those players were Wolves, Irene and Marta Pêcheur, made a decision to accept the pact. All of the others rejected it. At the end Watsiniad's decision was chosen to be played, and so the pact got rejected. We would have been able to use resources as food during our turn, and that definitely could have some potential value at some point, with us maybe wanting to go for iron mines. We have a lot of resources, and then maybe being able to trade some resources into food could be nice, but it maybe takes a while until the pact will actually do something to us. In the meantime, maybe the ability to use additional resources could be nice for Majondor to build up his economy quicker. On the other hand, if he wants to go for printing press, maybe he also needs a lot of food, and then him losing some food in order to gain some resource, actually not too bad. So I think it could have been also fine to accept it. At the end, I just thought maybe it's a little bit too dubious on whether we get something out of it or not, but maybe it could be nice to actually accept it and then have this pact available for later. Also, as you saw, Majondor then went for a kidnap aggression, and the players of course had full agreement that we didn't want to discard our nice tactic that we are having, with even having a chance to take knights at our next turn, and instead just discarded the Crusades. Majondor this turn, with all of those additional resources revealed, can finish the pyramids, goes for the printing press, builds 1 printing press, and then takes the patriotism. That means that it's now again at our turn. We don't have the choice to play any politics, so we can go straight towards to our action phase. All of the players made the decision to take the resource from the development of markets, either allowing to finish the Colossus quickly or allowing to go into the iron quickly, and then all of the players also made the decision to take the knights for 1 civil action, which I think is a no-brainer with having the medieval army tactic drawn. Also quite a bit lucky to have drawn a tactic already this early with having Hammurabi. And yeah, but apart from that, there were again, of course, was some variety. But the main agreement between most of the players was that it's time to go for iron. 9 out of the 10 players went for 2 iron upgrades. Only PV4 submitted a turn with only going for 1 iron upgrade, wanting to make it guaranteed that the Colossus can be finished at the next turn. However, and that is something that we maybe can also talk about later, of course, for all of the participants of this Hydra project, I was the only one who had the luxury to actually play out those turns and actually try out some different lines and see how they look like. The others just had to figure out the turn with just taking a look at the replay and not being able to play out the turns, which makes it of course more difficult. And for this turn, PV4 suggested a line that actually would have ended in corruption, and didn't notice it. So, and he mentioned that without that, he also would have gone for 2 upgrades. So basically 9 out of the 10 players went for 2 iron upgrades. Only Funestus made the decision to actually finish the Colossus first, maybe wanting to delay committing into the iron. But yeah, I think now that we have taken the iron, I still think it could have been maybe nice to be a bit more flexible. Instead, having the reserves now in hand, maybe going for warfare and knights, going for some military pressure with the Colossus potentially, maybe even having the potential to go for knights in Shishka could be interesting. But now, after having already committed 3 civil actions into the iron, probably now it's just you have to go for the iron probably, especially because it's not that easy to get out of corruption. So almost all of the players went with 2 iron upgrades, but then the question is how to spend the remaining civil action, or the last remaining civil action, after having taken the knights and going for 2 iron upgrades. And the majority went just with increasing the population, just after having taken the knights, going for 2 iron upgrades, and then increasing population, being prepared for development of religion and warfare, just having the civil action out of the way. 2 players actually made the decision to go for Chin of Arc here. I do think getting the 3rd military action for free without having to invest 5 science into the warfare can definitely be quite valuable. One of the players, Lambda, actually wanted to elect Chin of Arc already, while Dyrantropy, who also wanted to take Chin of Arc here, made the decision to keep Hammurabi for a bit longer and wanted to only take Chin of Arc in hand. So I do think Chin of Arc can be an interesting choice here. I think I definitely also considered her, but there's also Nostradamus coming down the road. We have now already the Warfare in hand, which could be a way to get a third military action. But I mean, Isabella Shishka would be gone. Nostradamus, with only being for now 2 military actions, could be a bit tricky. Then we have Eleanor, Leonardo, Barbarossa, who all can work nicely. Eleanor is a transitional leader, maybe Barbarossa if we have some food saved up, but maybe just committing to a perfectly fine leader here with Joan of Arc is actually a very interesting line, maybe a line that I definitely don't dislike. And then we had one line chosen by Irene, who made the decision to go for Isabella here. I do think Isabella has one clear short-term advantage, because the problem of going for the third iron upgrade now is that we have those iron upgrades going, but we have only 5 resources at the next turn, meaning if there now will be a lot of events seeded, the event deck could already be flipped before our next turn, and if there is no development of crafts revealed, which is the only development left that gives straight additional resources, then the Colossus can't be finished at the next turn, and then it could be a bit annoying if maybe we just stay weakest and the first H1 events will already be opened, so that could be a bit annoying. But with taking Isabella, we are actually not electing her, we are not at 5 but at 6 resource production, allowing to finish the Colossus regardless on what developments are revealed. So that's interesting. An interesting line. I at the end was fine with going for the 2 iron upgrades without taking Isabella. I was one of the players who just went for 2 iron upgrades and increased population. Because first of all, there can be development of crafts revealed. If there is development of science revealed, it's possible to get into knights. There could still be Nostradamus around, so I think there are enough options that allow maybe being prepared for those potential H1 strength events, so that I wasn't willing to commit to Isabella here. And no. At the end, maybe PV4 could potentially be at fault that we actually went with Isabella here, because after we rejected a pact, he mentioned that Wheel of Doom had done a very nice job so far of choosing the majority option, the option that maybe the most players wanted to go for. But after he wrote that in the chat, in the discussion, then now the Wheel of Doom choose one of the minority options and choose the option of Irene again, of wanting to go for Isabella, which definitely caused a little bit of upset for some of the other players, especially PV4, who I think doesn't really like Isabella at all, and also Martin Pêcheur definitely weren't the biggest fan of going for this Isabella line. Also some of the other players didn't like it that much, because we have already some additional resource production, so I think maybe some of the other leaders and the benefits that they have to offer are more needed than going for Isabella. Irene mentioned that it just allows finishing the Colossus at the next turn for certain, and if there are should be some colonies coming, she could definitely help colonizing them. There is a Suez Cannon cooking the game, so he just went for Isabella, but also just keeping Hammurabi for a bit longer and having more civil actions to work with could potentially be quite nice. So there were definitely some players that weren't really that happy with the Isabella take, but the Wheel of Doom made the decision to pick Irene's turn again, and so we went with Isabella, electing her, going for the last iron upgrade, not going into consumption yet, so definitely a lot of production is gained by that, but losing the civil action could be a bit bad, and also maybe some other leaders could have potentially been more interesting. I think I would have liked it more to maybe go for Joan of Arc here than for Isabella. I at the end went with not committing to any leader and just getting that population increase going. But here at the end, the Wheel of Doom decided that the turn that 10-headed Hydra will go for is this Isabella turn. And now we will draw a colonization card. DANeo seeds and opens the development of settlement. He will finish the Universitas this turn, goes up to 3 science production, takes Jan Žižka in hand, elects him, reveals the Legion tactic, goes for alchemy and increases his population. Then it's Majondor's turn. He will seed, opens the development of agriculture. He seeds again and opens the development of politics, which is interesting, especially with having had Hammurabi. Those additional draws could be quite nice. And as you can see, we have now actually drawn an additional colony and also an additional colonization card, with having now Colossus and having committed to Isabella. Of course, we maybe can make better use out of her if there are some colonies coming, so that could be an interesting draw for us, and it could maybe be interesting to push that colony into the deck. Majondor then makes the decision to increase his population, builds the second printing press, increases population again, plays the patriotism, builds a warrior, doesn't have any tactic, no fighting band tactic to reveal yet, and then takes the rich land. A second copy of knights will get discarded. Now it was the Hydra's turn again, and first of all, with having that developed territory in hand, there was the decision to be made whether to seed or not. And here actually almost all of the players made a decision to seed. Only Dyron was a bit afraid, and I mean, definitely rightly so. We have 9 food saved up, don't have knowledge about reds. Reds could be a complete disaster to be revealed. Also we are the weakest, so some strength events could be annoying, especially call to arms. Losing 2 civil actions here could be very, very bad. But the thing is, we can't really get stronger this turn anyway. If we build a warrior and maybe reveal the tactic, we are at 3 strength if we finish the Colossus, we are at 3 strength, and then we don't have enough resource left to build a warrior, so strength events might hit us anyway after our turn. And when we take a look at the reds, Majondor at his last turn just made a decision to take the rich land with his last civil action, and he could have also increased his population. If he would have seeded the reds, I think he definitely would increase his population. Also DANeo has a lot of food saved up, so with that, 9 out of the 10 players were willing to seed, because if we don't seed the developed territory now, with only having 2 military actions, it will actually be quite a bit tricky to keep the cards that we want to keep. We have tactics, we have colonization cards, and then also keeping the developed territory to maybe seed it at a future turn could be quite difficult, and so at the end, the most players wanted to seed, and also the player whose turn got chosen, Varsinians, was one of those players, and so the developed territory got pushed into the deck. And we were happy to see that the event revealed is actually the strategic territory, so a colony. We have now Isabella, so you have definitely the ability to bid for that relatively highly, especially with having already some very nice resource production going. And there's a Suez Canal in the game, we have another colony already seeded, so out of the sudden, at a turn before, we went for Isabella, speculating about maybe she could be nice for colonization, but now we have drawn a colony, and the colony is open, which again might give us some additional draws, and who knows what we will draw with that. So that is definitely a very interesting turn of events for us. Also, we don't get punished by any bad event, instead an event is revealed is actually nice for us. But now the question, of course, was what to bid for this colony, and there were some different bids committed. 5 of the players went with a bid for 5. I was one of them, Martin, also PV4 and I were generally some of the players who went with the higher bids most of the times. Then we had 4 bids for 4, and we had 1 bid for 3. And that 1 bid for 3 is actually the bid that got chosen by Dyron. So I was very happy that we still won it for 3. I think I would have been a little bit annoyed if maybe Majondor or DANeo would have won it for 4, because I think with the Suez Canal and now having Isabella and the ability to maybe set up for Suez Canal very nicely, with us having already seeded another colony, I would really much like to win this colony, and I was willing to bid 5, so by both colonization cards and 3 resources from Isabella. Luckily, the colony was won anyway, so but there was a little bit of a surprising bid by Dyron. But the thing is, of course, if we spend resource here with Isabella, then we don't have enough resource left to finish the Colossus, meaning that we have maybe to do some different stuff, which could be a bit annoying. But now we are able to win the colony, and the interesting thing about winning this colony is that thanks to the 2 strength, out of the sudden we are actually able to maybe prepare ourselves for potential strength events that are to come. So Dyron made a decision that the 2 colonization cards will be paid for this, as he wanted to leave all of the resource available to potentially be able to finish the Colossus. We draw some new cards, another colony, so this Isabella pick, maybe Irene had sensed something like this, but now out of the sudden Isabella has the potential to give us a lot of value, with maybe being able to use her for colony bidding quite often. This turn was a little bit of a tricky one again, and there is a little bit of a dilemma at this turn, because basically there has to be a decision to be made whether we want to finish the Colossus, which would make us the strongest, so prepared for strength event, but we wouldn't be able to bid for any colony any longer. Maybe we shouldn't expect any more colonies to come anyway. We know that the developed territory is in the next deck, we know that the vast territory is in our hand, and a naval trade agreement pact earlier on got rejected. Majondor has offered it with giving DANeo the additional colonization force, so there are not really any big indicators that there is another colony coming, but who knows, with Caesar he can just seed everything into the deck that he gets, but he also didn't seed that much, so there could be another colony coming, especially with now maybe having already a plan to potentially set up for a very big Suez Canal. It could be annoying to miss out on a colony. However, if we don't finish the Suez Canal, then it's a bit tricky, because while we maybe can build a warrior to be prepared to bid for colonies, it's not that easy to again get stronger, because in order to do that, we have to build 2 warriors, meaning we use both of our 2 military actions, which can maybe be fine, but the problem is then we don't have a free military action to reveal our medieval army tactic, which is maybe the tactic that we actually want to go for. And if we have to keep that in hand, then we can't keep both vast territory and the defense card, which could maybe be very nice to keep. So it's a bit of a dilemma. Do we want to be prepared for strength events with finishing the Colossus? Do we want to be prepared for colonies with building a warrior, but then vulnerable to strength events? Or do we want to be prepared for both with building 2 warriors, but then not being able to reveal the medieval army tactic, which is annoying on then when we take a look at what cards has to be discarded. And now, 5 out of the 10 players made the decision to finish the Colossus, just be prepared for strength events. There was definitely the argument and the discussion that it doesn't really look like any strength events might be seeded. I think Confucius seeding strength events against Caesar and the Colossus would be very brave. Majondor is Caesar, could have seeded some strength events, but he went for a 2 printing press setup, which really doesn't make it look like there are some big strength events coming. So with that, maybe it can be fine to just stay weaker, but who knows, there might still be a strength event, and then it could be quite annoying to just be 1 strength short of potentially winning it. So 5 players went with just finishing the Colossus, especially because another colony to be revealed is maybe also not that likely. And then those 5 players who went with finishing the Colossus, 4 of them, let me just check that quickly. Alright, so the players who finished the Colossus, 3 of them went just with increasing the population 2 times with the 2 remaining civil actions. 1 went with increasing population and taking monarchy, maybe with the idea of doing revolution at some point in an alternative way to get a 3rd military action. And also let me check, I have written it down, which players went with which option. So Irene and Varziniec went with finishing the Colossus and increasing population 2 times. Chengisib went with the monarchy pick and increasing the population. And Dyrantropy actually went with finishing the Colossus and then taking the alchemy. And Wolves was also one of the players who finished the Colossus and then increased population 2 times. So Dyrantropy wanted to have the alchemy in hand here. Chengisib wanted to go for the monarchy. Then there were 4 players who made the decision to just build 1 warrior, be weakest for strength events, but potentially be prepared for colonies. And those 4 players also had some different lines for the last civil actions. 2 went with increasing population 3 times and building a step of the Colossus in addition to building the warrior. Those 2 players were Matapeshur and Lambda. Then we had a player who went with an iron upgrade instead of building the step. That was PV4. And there was also some discussion about it later on that why not just go for this upgrade, get the production going earlier. But this discussion will get a bit more heavily on the next turn when there again will be the question on whether to upgrade the iron mine or not. And then there was actually a little bit more of a heated discussion going on. But for now, PV4 also would have already liked to go for an upgrade this turn already. And then we had Funestus, who also wanted to take the monarchy like Chengisib, but he went with building a warrior instead of finishing the Colossus, also maybe with the idea of potentially at some point doing a revolution to get the 3rd military action and also a government form going. So 4 players went with 1 warrior, and I was actually the unique player this time, the odd one out, who made the decision to go for 2 warriors. And that was a tricky turn for me to figure out. But I do think it has some advantages to go for the 2 warriors line. First of all, we are prepared for both of the things. We can bid for colonies, but we are also prepared for strength events, which is nice. But then of course there's the question what to do on the discard, because do I want to keep just medieval army tactic vast territory? But I actually at the end thought that maybe it could be nice to, instead of going for knights soon and going for the medieval army tactic, it could actually be quite valuable to go for the warfare and the fighting band tactic here, which also gives us a very reasonable amount of strength, When we finish the Colossus, we are at 4, with the Warfare at 5, with 2 Warriors and the Fighting Band tactic, we are already at 8 strength. That might already be enough to maybe make us the strongest, for example, or at least be competitive in the strength. And we have the extremely valuable third military action, which allows us to maybe draw more cards, keep more colonies and colonization cards in hand, just be a lot more flexible. And yeah, so I went with the 2 Warriors line and actually would have discarded the medieval army tactic here. I could have imagined that maybe that could have caused some upset if my turn at the end got chosen. I actually then kept the Fighting Band tactic and the Vast Territory, even thought about just keeping Vast Territory in the colonization card with the idea of copying the Legion tactic later on. But I actually thought, and I was the only one who I think mainly considered this, as all of the other players revealed the medieval army tactic to be able to keep more cards in hand. I think I was the only one here who thought that maybe it could be a nice alternative to get into Fighting Band with Warfare, having the third military action, which I think is also extremely valuable as soon as the Colossus draws are there, because getting the Colossus draws and then only being able to hold 2 cards in hand is just extremely annoying. So I went with the special warfare line, and I actually just increased my population 3 times and also took the alchemy, because I thought that there is a chance that we might have 2 more turns in H1, which would give us the option after building those 2 warriors to at the next turn go for 2 alchemy upgrades. At the next turn then we would be at 1 plus 4 science, and in 2 turns we still would have enough resources to finish the Colossus and enough science to go for the warfare. We would have the Fighting Band tactic, we maybe would be in a nice position in the strength, we would have our science production covered. It might happen though that maybe if some cards are taken that it is too risky to not finish the Colossus, and that maybe the Colossus has to be finished before the alchemy, then it's not that easy to get both alchemy and warfare going quickly. But yeah, I definitely in this turn had a little bit of not one of the majority turns and went with a bit more of a special turn. At the end, maybe the majority turn got chosen. The turn that got a player that was picked by the Wheel of Doom for this turn was Wolves, and he was one of the players who just increased the population 2 times, finished the Colossus, increased the population again, revealed the medieval army tactic, and at the end kept the Vast Territory and a colonization card in hand. Then it's the end of our turn, we draw the raid. We also see now how valuable that additional science is, thanks to building the lab first instead of the mine. Now at the next turn we have the option to either go for knights or warfare, just because we have built a lab first instead of the mines. So in hindsight, I definitely think that was a very good decision to go for the lab first. Our decision to finish the Colossus here gets rewarded, and surprisingly the foray is revealed, something unexpected to us, as we didn't really expect any strength events. Maybe that could have been one of Caesar's event, because for him, unfortunately, when he took a look at our turn, same as he saw that maybe we couldn't really get stronger than 3 strength, so maybe if Majondor would have pushed this event, it could have been a fine turn for him to just go for 3 strength, as we can't go for more than 3 strength anyway. However, as we seeded at our turn and the strategic territory got revealed, out of the sudden we had a way to get stronger, and now Majondor misses out on the foray. Maybe it was also seeded by DANeo. If you want to find out about it, check out DANeo's videos. I didn't find the time yet to take a look at all of them. There was one thing that I wanted to check out immediately. We will come to that later on. One thing about his politic cards, but I don't know for certain which event was seeded by which player, but it definitely could have been seeded by Majondor, but of course also by DANeo, and we definitely got quite a bit lucky here. First we were weakest, revealed a colony that we're able to win that only allows us to get stronger, and then the foray is revealed. Definitely some lucky timing for us. Then we were very interested to see that DANeo actually went for the cartography here, and with him already having warfare in hand, which maybe also could be technology that serves similar purposes, it definitely looks like that at least 1 more colony is coming, maybe even more. Definitely, maybe we thought it could be in anticipation of us, or as a reaction that we went for Isabella and Colossus, maybe thinking that we have some colonies drawn, which is also the case, only that we drew the colonies after making the decision to go for Colossus and Isabella. But yeah, definitely could mean that there are actually some more colonies coming, and DANeo develops the cartography immediately. After that, builds an alchemy directly, goes up to 5 science production, builds a warrior, has now some very strong science production going, and is also the strongest with developing the cartography. Majondor goes for the theocracy with committing to 2 printing presses. Maybe the additional happy face will be very valuable for him, and he this turn will reveal the Fighting Band tactic, also with having the pyramids. He Actually, the theocracy is a perfectly fine government form, and then he interestingly takes the bread and circuses for 2 civil actions, again with not increasing his population, giving a big indicator that we maybe shouldn't be too afraid of rats. And he also commits to a 3rd printing press here, so he also has some very decent science and also culture production going on already now. At our turn, we are again the weakest now, and the question is again, do we want to push or not? And here I think there was a complete agreement that at this turn it is just too risky to push because we can get stronger this turn, and the vast territory is a little bit of a commitment anyway, especially now that DANeo actually went with Yanchishka. So this time there was agreement for the politics phase at least. What there wasn't agreement about is what to do with the turn, and it's also again maybe a little bit tricky on what to do. The thing that of course looks like the most obvious to do at first is to go for the knights, build a knight, build a warrior, get strongest, be prepared for events, maybe even put a tiny bit of pressure on the opponents, even though with the military actions just building an army isn't really enough pressure for now. And then there could just be some actions done like increasing population 2 times, going for an iron upgrade, going for this army, and it could be a very solid turn, and that is also a turn that was chosen by most of the players. I think 5 players went with upgrading an iron, taking 3 resources from foray, which actually only allows going for an iron upgrade plus building a medieval army tactic. And then increasing the population 2 times, just spending the civil actions very efficiently, not wasting any civil actions on taking one of those cards, which are maybe not necessarily needed. But there were also some players who went also with the medieval army, but then made different moves for their remaining 3 civil actions. We had 2 players who, after going for 2 times population increase and developing knights, went with taking the engineering genius. And that definitely caused some discussion in the Discord that I set up for this project. Because taking the engineering genius over the iron upgrade is of course somewhat inefficient, especially considering that we are on 4 civil actions and that resources may be not the thing that we need the most anyway. So taking this engineering genius feels a bit weird. But one of the 2 players who went with this engineering genius line, Marta Pecheur, was definitely told us a lot about the advantages of that play and vision that he had for the next few turns on how to play them out. The other player that went with the engineering genius pick was by the way Lambda, and that turn got also chosen at the end. So that was of course one more reason why this maybe sparked some discussion, as a lot of especially PV4 who already wanted to upgrade the mine at the turn before was now again saw that this mine again didn't upgrade, and he just is maybe economically focused player who wants to get his upgrades in, but is of course perfectly fine. Marta wanted to take the engineering genius to have, after going for medieval army tactic, which we can also play out, wanted to have 10 resources at the next turn, because that would allow, with the theology that is coming down the road, which we have just enough science to develop, it would allow at the next turn to develop, build a theology, increase population, and then we have just enough resources to also build another medieval army tactic. And together with the Colossus and the strategic territory, that would put us at 14 strength. And then after that turn, we would very likely, or for certain, get our Colossus draws. So out of the sudden, we would be sitting at 14 strength with the Colossus draws, which could really cause some trouble for our opponents. Both of them, Majondor has committed a lot of population into printing press. DANeo maybe could find a way to defend against this, but it could also at least take some investments from his side. So Marta really wanted to go for this military push here. Really felt like this could give us a bit of a nice position, lead to us having a nice position, force some reaction out of our opponents. The thing is, of course, also with going for the iron upgrade, it will still be possible to go for another knight and a warrior the next turn, also going up to 14 strength, and then you could take the theology in hand and just build it in 2 turns when the happy faces will be needed. I think it's unlikely that the age will end before our next turn, so the happy faces will likely not be needed already. Of course, it would make us safer from a rebellion, which could potentially be an event that might be in there, and so Also with going for the iron upgrade, going for this military push is not completely out of the question. Maybe just going for this theology allows us to spend the civil actions more effectively, and having that civil action of building and developing it already out of the way, meaning maybe more freedom at the beginning of Age 2, depending on what cards are there in the row. So if that is the completely fixed plan, I think it could maybe be nice to rather be set up for going for the theology instead of going for this iron upgrade, especially with maybe going for an aggressive push. Marta also mentioned that maybe we can just destroy the stupid mine, with being in this discussion about PV4 and why we didn't upgrade this mine and took the engineering genius for resources. One reason to take the engineering genius is also to make it more likely that the theology will actually be available for one civil action, because if it isn't taken, maybe it will still fall down to 1 anyway, but there is at least a chance that it will stay on 2, so the engineering genius, while it's a card that's not really needed, might at the end potentially result in an additional civil action in case the theology doesn't fall down that quickly, but it might be likely that it might fall down to 1 civil actions anyway. So Lambda and Marta went with this engineering genius line that at the end was chosen, but also sparked some discussion, as a lot of players just preferred a more efficient line maybe with going for the iron upgrade, but Marta really wanted to go for this 2 medieval army tactic push with the Colossus draws. And I saw the appeal of it. It definitely might force some reactions out of the opponents. I was very skeptical that we actually would be able to pull an aggression off if we should draw 1 with the Colossus. Because I thought with there being 2 copies of Swordsman left, probably the opponents will find a way to set themselves up, but it might actually at least require them some investment for them. And some investment into Swordsman, committing some resources and science instead of committing it elsewhere, so that is definitely somewhat appealing. However, I and Funestus were the 2 players who actually went with a completely different line, because instead of going for this medieval army tactic, despite having discarded the fighting band tactic earlier on, we still went. I was still convinced that the 3rd military action of the warfare could be very valuable, especially if we maybe have a plan now to go for some colonies. Being able to hold more cards for the Colossus in hand, being able to hold more colonies and colonization cards, and also allowing us to be strongest for now anyway, I think could be quite nice, which is why I went with the warfare here. Maybe could also allow for a nice Republic revolution with already having developed the warfare. Instead of having committed science to knights, also with committing science to knights, maybe we draw fortifications or something like this, or defensive army with the Colossus draw, and then it can have some benefits of not having committed science into knights. Anyway, on the other hand, the warfare is maybe a bit of a luxury tech, maybe a military tech will be needed at some point anyway, and then it could also be argued that committing 5 science into warfare is of course also some science that might be missing elsewhere at some point, but I and Funestus, especially with having the colonization game in mind, really wanted to go for the 3rd military action here. And then we had a player who already at some turns before was maybe the odd one out, Dyrantropy, with going for the bid of 3, with taking the alchemy, even though I also actually would have gone for the alchemy the turn before, and I think also the Stonehenge at the beginning, and this turn he actually would have grabbed a drama after going for the medieval army tactic and increasing population 2 times. He would have grabbed the drama. Those players who didn't go with the additional iron upgrade and all with the plan to build another army and a theology, the next turn actually took 1 resource and 2 food out of the fray, because that would have resulted in an additional population. So yeah, at the end we went with Marta's preferred line, but the turn player that was picked was Lambda, but it was the turn that also Marta would have chosen, and at the end went with this engineering genius pick. That definitely sparked some discussions, and yeah, but who knows, this military push with going up to 14 strength at the next turn and the Colossus draws could definitely cause some trouble to our opponents, especially because Majondor will lose Caesar soon, so there might be some potential. Then again, vast territory in the colonization card is kept in hand. DANeo seeds and opens the uncertain borders, and again, those event reveals have been really amazing for us. We were weakest seeded, the strategic territory got revealed, we got some colony draws, now we wander foray in the uncertain borders, so some very lucky event reveals for us for now. DANeo will go for the 2nd upgrade to alchemy. Now it's 6 science production already, with having alchemy and universitas, develops the warfare and then takes the irrigation. Majondor, at his turn, has to think about how he wants to set up for this potential military push, but first of all he will seed, and here was an event revealed that could of course lead us back from those potential military push plans. The wealthy territory is revealed, and it's of course a tricky question. On one hand, now that we have a little bit committed to this aggressive line that was preferred by Martar, it could be nice to not win this colony, maybe even let it win by one of the opponents and let them discard a colonization card, which could make a successful aggression more likely. But of course, we also have already won a colony. There are more colonies coming. We have the vast territory in hand, so just securing as many colonies as possible for the Suez Canal could be quite valuable. And so at the end, the majority was willing to bid quite something for it. And we had 2 bids for 6, 6 bids for 5. And I was also one of those who bid 5 because I thought I still kind of would like to win it, but if one really wants to overpay, then this aggressive line could be even more valuable, so I didn't want to go for 6. Because of the aggressive line, it could still be possible. And the one player who went only with a bid of 4 was Martar Pesher, really still hoping that maybe this military push could be pulled off, but at the end Lambda's decision was again chosen for the colony bid, and he made a decision to bid 5, I think. With that, a colony was won, and with that, going up to 14 strength with us only having 2 military actions won't be possible at the next turn. So we win it for a knight, a colonization card, and 1 resource. The plus side is, of course, we have another colony, and the Suez Canal could potentially be extremely strong for us. With maybe there at least being a little bit of military pressure going on, Majondor, instead of maybe going for Leonardo for more science production, just goes for Barbarossa, goes for 2 activations immediately. One of those warrior actually has to be deleted immediately, but it still saved a civil action and a bit of food. He saved a civil action and a bit of food with using Barbarossa to increase it. Will not have any draws, but is at 5 strength, and maybe with going for irrigation has the potential to at some point get even more Barbarossa activations going. Now it is our turn again, and here we have only 1 card in hand, so the question is, do we want to seed or not? And interestingly, we had a very high majority of 9 players who made the decision, yes, we want to seed here, while I, this time, was like in the 2 turns before, with me really wanting to go for this warfare, I was the odd one out who made the decision to not push. The others really wanted to have this colony in the next deck, maybe being able to use Isabella's resources. With us having the strength lead, that of course can also help us winning some colonies, because the others maybe can't bid as much while still being able to defend against an aggression from us, which is maybe an advantage of going for the medieval army tactic instead of the warfare, also with having colonization in mind. And yeah, so having this colony in the next deck could be quite strong, being able to win it, maybe for an army with some rocks from Isabella, could be extremely strong, getting the more yellow tokens, and just, now we are not the weakest, continue pushing, could just be very nice. And the reason why I wanted to keep it in hand is that we have now already 2 colonies, there's another one coming, and I do think we are extremely well prepared for the Suez Canal. And we have only 2 military actions. We might have to rebuild some militaries with those colonies. If we don't get a colony immediately with the Colossus draw, I do think it could be annoying if the Suez Canal is available relatively early. It would already be a very strong wonder for us, but it could be annoying if we don't have any colony in hand to colonize it. So I wanted to hold off with seeding here, thinking that with the developed territory coming, we already maybe can win another nice colony, and then keeping the vast territory in hand for the Suez Canal. But for this politics phase, PV4's decision was chosen, and he made a decision, was one of the 9 players who made the decision to seed the vast territory into the deck. The event revealed is the scientific breakthrough, really giving all of the our opponents a lot of science. At least the 2 science is still somewhat valuable for us. Also, at this point, we have to do a shout out to Varziniac, because early on, when I think only 1 or 2 H1 events were already revealed, he made a call on what he predicts for the remaining events to be, and he called the scientific breakthrough. He called that there is probably 1 more strength event coming, and he also expected 1 more colony to be coming, which at the end was an extremely accurate prediction. And I think if I remember his interview correctly that he had after winning the international championship, when he was asked about what is maybe his special skill, where he's especially good at, and what helps him maybe win games in through the ages, I think he mentioned that he's very good at noticing some little odd things at the opponent's turns that could give him hints on what events might be seeded. And here in this project, he really showed it off. He predicted those events very nicely, and then also later on, I think he again made a relatively accurate prediction, really showing that he is quite nice in doing those event predictions by maybe taking a look at the actions of the opponents. So very nice prediction by him. The scientific breakthrough is revealed. So now that this event deck is flipped, we definitely have to. It has to be mentioned that we were quite lucky on the event order in this first H1 event deck, with the strategic territory being revealed, allowing us to be stronger, then foray and uncertain borders being revealed. We had no warrior for a while, then there was the colony revealed after we had already again some units being able to win it, and now at the end a scientific breakthrough. To be fair, it has to be at least said that not only the strategic territory would have allowed us to get stronger, also the wealthy territory and the scientific breakthrough, all three events, the scientific breakthrough with allowing us to go for knights, and the wealthy territory with allowing us to finish the Colossus and building a warrior. So also those two events would have allowed us to actually get stronger at this turn when we open the strategic territory. So it's maybe not as insanely lucky as it first seems, but still definitely quite lucky on how this event order worked out for us, and also in how this Isabella pick maybe worked out for us, with now out of the sudden already having 1-2 colonies and 2 more to come, with not having had any knowledge about the colonies at the moment when we picked her. Now the question is what to do at this turn. Now that we won the wealthy territory, the plan of maybe going for 2 medieval army tactics and building the theology is not really possible any longer. And it's actually quite a bit tricky what to do. Dyrandropy and I also, to some extent, who were in favor of picking the alchemy early on, were a bit annoyed of maybe not having such an option available now. I think it would have been quite nice to now go for the alchemies, go for some upgrades, spend the civil actions like this. Because we could of course just take some cards in hand, but very quickly we will have some limited hand space, which is why also some players were still a little bit annoyed by this engineering genius pick at the turn before, which is now really causing us some hand space issues. We can't develop the warfare, and if we take some cards we have to make space in hand. So if we take something like theology, maybe we have to develop it already with not necessarily needing it immediately, especially if we should indeed win those colonies that are coming. And so it was tricky to figure that one out, and 8 out of the 10 players made the decision to take the breakthrough here, and made the decision to spend 2 civil actions into the breakthrough, because science is really the thing that we really need the most. So that was the thing that most players went for. And then there was probably also the maturity turn chosen for this turn. It was the turn by Bortzinitz. It was also the turn that was preferred by me and Lambda, and it was to just take the breakthrough, go for this last iron upgrade, go for rebuilding, or go for building 2 knights to just use as many military actions now in H1 to get more H2 draws later on. And then with the last civil action, we can also take a quick look at this. With the last civil action, we prefer to build this religion. Preferred is maybe a big word, in the sense that I didn't really like building this religion that much, but I liked it more than clogging up our hand. I think having a completely full hand could be extremely annoying at the next turn, because it could be interesting if there's an early government form to just be able to take it. If we get very lucky, maybe we could even have something like a scientific method fall down to 2 civil actions, which we could have the option to go for. It's of course not likely, but I do think it is important to leave yourself prepared for potentially strong options that could arise, if possible, if it isn't too costly. And this religion is maybe not that much needed, but the happy face, at least at the moment, is required. It starts a little bit of culture production. We have enough resource anyway, and I just liked it a lot more than taking another card and making it that the hand is actually full, because at the next turn, if we take something like frugality, which some players preferred, for example, Irene liked the turn most with taking breakthrough, going for the iron upgrade and taking the frugality. Then we have a full hand. The frugality can't be used at the next turn unless the vast territory is revealed. Developing the warfare is a bit of a science commitment, could still be nice. The engineering genius can't be that nicely used, so it's quite of a tricky turn. And at the end I just wanted to have 1 free hand space, which is why I, Bortzinitz and Lambda at the end made the decision to just build this temple, at least getting a bit of culture production going. There were also some players who didn't like building this temple at all. Martin said he would have rather wasted a civil action instead of building this temple. I think it's not too bad to just build this temple. Definitely not great, but I was willing to do it in order to have a free hand space. Then Martin meant with a masonry pick for the last civil action, something that maybe can be developed with the breakthrough, can maybe be helpful when there are some wonders coming, and could just be a technology that could still be useful. I definitely see how that could definitely be appealing, but on the other hand, we are so low in science that I also didn't really like it that much to invest 3 science into the masonry. We had then 2 players, Funestus and Wolves, who just made the decision to take the masonry in addition to the breakthrough and upgrading this mine at a theology. But if with those colonies coming, the theology might not be needed that much in the near future, so I thought maybe just building this religion might give us enough happy faces. Also, building this religion at least makes us safe from a rebellion, which does look like a likely event, but who knows, it might not be completely impossible that it could be in the deck. And then the last two, some of the last considered options, one, and again, maybe being a bit the odd one out, Dyron made the decision to take the breakthrough and the swordsman. A turn where he wrote that he didn't really like it at all, but he thought that maybe denying the swordsman, I think from Majondor, could make him potentially quite vulnerable. But while this could maybe be interesting in case we go for a bit of an aggressive line, I didn't like it too much. I wouldn't like it too much to use our precious civil actions in hand space to actually go for the denial pick. Of course, the swordsman could at some point still be nice for us in order to maybe have be better prepared for H2 tactics. But I think it's very, very costly to go for this kind of denial, and the effect is maybe a bit too dubious. There might be an early strategy, an early rifleman, and already this pick doesn't do anything for us, and I think we are not in that desperate of a position that we maybe have to hope for something like this, but it definitely could have some nice benefits, potentially denying that one, so definitely at least something to think about. But then we also had 2 players who didn't take the breakthrough at all. I mean, it's a bit costly to take it for 2 civil actions. We had Chengisip, who just went maybe with the originally considered line of developing, building a theology and going for 1 iron upgrade, I think. And then we had PV4, who also went for the iron upgrade and then took and developed the masonry and then took the frugality in hand. So here we can... Yeah, I again see we had a lot of different lines considered. It's a tricky turn. No turn really looks good. So maybe not winning the wealthy territory and actually going for a second army, going up to 14 strength could have been nice at the end. But on the other hand, if we get a chance to get a Suez Canal, this additional colony could still be extremely valuable to have. At the end, the majority turn got chosen. That was preferred by me, Varzinians, and Wolves. Lambda. And so we build 2 knights and go for building the religion, taking the breakthrough and going for the last iron upgrade. And now, of course, there was a very interesting moment because the first Colossus draw is coming in, and if we should get the strong H2 colony, the Suez Canal could just be looking extremely strong. I would have preferred to keep the vast territory in hand, to not be too much dependent on the draw. But now we were, of course, very happy. The player whose turn was chosen, Varzinians, also actually mentioned that as an extension of his turn, he would have liked to see the autonomous territory now. And we didn't get the autonomous territory here, but maybe the second best colony that we could get, the developed territory, could help us out even just a lot with the science, with our low science. And as you can see, the first card revealed from H2 is actually the Suez Canal. So things are at this point of the game coming together extremely nicely for us, and if we should have a chance to get the Suez Canal at the next turn, it could just leave us with the additional science from the developed territory in an extremely strong position. So at this point, I think it looks like we have a very strong position. But of course, there's still a chance that maybe the Suez Canal could get denied, and this chance could potentially increase with this historic territory revealed, which is opened by DANeo. And there were some different bids for it. 4 players went with a bid of 4, maybe not wanting to commit as much into this colony, especially because the happy face isn't needed at all, and there are some other more valuable colonies coming, so definitely maybe fair to not want to bid that much. However, DANeo at the colony before bid already 5, meaning that I think it should be quite likely that he will bid 5 again, which is why I was one of the players who rather wanted to bid 5 for this colony. And because either we win it, and then I think 5 is still a somewhat acceptable price, but more likely is it maybe that it will just push DANeo's price. So I think here the bid of 5 is maybe a bit better than the bid of 4, because I don't think it's a complete disaster if we at the end should win it for 5. And there was also one player, I think it was PV4, who was actually willing to bid 6, which might have been enough to win the colony, but it could have been also a bit costly. But it could be worth it maybe, because if now DANeo wins the colony, he has a colony 1. If he has maybe another one drawn already in his hand, denying the Suez Canal, maybe also if he has no colony in hand, could actually be interesting, especially with the happy face. It might be easier for him to get out of corruption, which is something that Cengiz noticed. So now with DANeo winning this colony, maybe there could be a world where he actually just denies the Suez Canal, but he of course doesn't know whether we actually have a colony drawn. He knows that we have spent all of our H1 cards, so it is completely random whether we have a colony in hand, and then going for such a big and denial pick would just be extremely costly. But he could have taken the Suez Canal now after winning the colony, building some warriors, getting out of corruption, but then it would take a long time until he can finish it. So he doesn't go for the Suez Canal denial here, which we of course were happy to see, but it definitely is probably the right decision, unless maybe he has a backup colony in hand, but even then it's just extremely costly. Instead, he will go for the Code of Laws. He has a lot of science production, can still easily, after going for the Code of Laws, get into a government form, so I think that makes a lot of sense. And then he will also take the urban growth and the frugality. Doesn't bother picking this late iron, maybe rather wants to hope to get into coal. Now it's Majondor's turn. He will go for the bread and circuses, has to build one, because otherwise he has an uprising issue, is already relatively deep into his yellow bank, but has those printing presses set up and is starting to generate a little bit of a culture lead. He will then go for going for one iron upgrade, and then ends the turn. Now we have the next turn. Again, first we had to make a decision about politics, and here we had again a big majority, like with the vast territory, that wanted to push. 9 wanted to cede the freedom of movement, and one player wanted to skip politics, and a player that wanted to skip politics. Let me just quickly check if I see it in my notes which player that was. Wolves was, I think, the only player who didn't want to cede here. Yeah, turn 8 politics, but Funesto's decision for politics was chosen, and with that the freedom of movement got ceded. We are the strongest, we win tiebreakers for colonies, so I do think it's fine to put that into the deck. The event revealed is the vast territory, so another colony, and again the question was how much to bid for that, and we had some different bids. We had one player who only actually bid 7 for that. That was Cengiz, interestingly, wasn't willing to bid as much for the colony. I think because if we want, I don't remember exactly what his reasoning was, but he only would have been willing to bid 7. All of the others were willing to bid at least 8. We had 4 bids for 8, 3 bids for 9, 1 bid for 10, that was my bid, an extremely high bid. It would require us to send all units away and 3 resources from Isabella, but I was at the end thinking that it is just maybe worth it, and then we can go for the Suez Canal. We can only rebuild 1 knight, but it is still making us somewhat strong enough. And then we almost had one player, Lambda, who actually made the decision to go all in on this colony, bidding 11, so all units, and 6 resources from Isabella. So he really wanted to make completely sure that we win this colony. At the end, the bid of Funestus got chosen, who bid 8, and it was also just exactly enough to win it for us. And that requires us to bid an army and 3 resources. Then for our action phase, I thought that maybe for the first time we could have a turn where we have complete agreement between all players. But I was wrong. Because when I took a look at this turn, thought it's just completely straightforward. We have to take the Suez Canal here, it's way too strong, and then for the remaining civil action it should just be best to increase population, build a warrior, get strongest again, maybe being able to bid potentially more for the developed territory 1 that is coming. So I thought it should be a very straightforward line, and it was also a line that was definitely chosen by a lot of players, by 7. But there were 3 players who went by a different line and maybe saw something that I didn't consider as much, but maybe also just overlooked, because I think it is definitely an interesting option to consider. 3 players, and those players were Varzinians, Cengiz, and Wolves, made the decision to take the Suez Canal, but instead of increasing the population, they actually used the engineering genius on the first step. That still makes it that we have no corruption, because still 1 resource is spent, and we have 1 blue token lying around in bronze mines. And then at the next turn, if there's the architecture available, it would open up the possibility of a turn where we take architecture, develop it, finish the Suez Canal, get the developed territory, and thanks to having already built the first step, we then would be able to also take the scientific method. And with Majondor being on printing presses and DANeo on alchemy, the scientific method might still be available, and the architecture maybe also. So that could be quite strong, getting the architecture and the scientific method at the next turn, which is why those 3 players went with building the first steps. Definitely something that I overlooked. I'm not sure if I like it the most. I do think getting a bit stronger, being prepared for colonies is maybe just a bit more of a safe line, especially because if DANeo actually takes Rifleman Cannon and Efficient upgrade, and that is not unlikely that he will do that, then actually the scientific method will be discarded before our turn anyway. The architecture might also be taken by our opponents, with them having a lot of science production, and with that I at the end wasn't, even with now considering this line, which I have to admit I didn't consider when I suggested my turn, and with that I went with Suez Canal increasing population, and only after I saw the other turns that were suggested, I thought, I guess it could have been interesting, but I think it's just maybe not certain enough that those 2 cards will actually be available, and so I think I preferred the line of increasing the warrior. That's also the line that got chosen at the end. Again, Funestus, for the 3rd time in a row, got picked by the Wheel of Doom, and has guided our civilizations for the last 3 decisions. And now we can build this warrior, and at the next turn we can finish the Suez Canal, which should give us an extremely big boost, going up to 11 resource production and getting the extremely valuable science out of the developed territory. Also, we draw 1 card, the Politics of Strength, definitely an event that could potentially be interesting to push. Then you will go for the cannons, the Rifleman. Actually, the efficient upgrade stays on 2 civil actions. That is something that I just overlooked. But of course, the reserves can be taken by DANeo, which he will do, meaning that now the scientific method will actually be discarded. Maybe something that he did on purpose, or maybe just something that came together for him. Maybe the turn was just the most logical. Definitely looks like a completely straightforward turn. Majondor goes for the justice system, goes up to 6 civil actions, takes the wave of nationalism, the efficient upgrade, and goes for an iron upgrade. And then it is our turn again. There again has to be a decision to be made on whether to seed or not. And again, we had a majority who was willing to seed. We are the strongest. We can win tiebreakers for colonies. Some, I think, didn't really want it that much to see a colony revealed, as it might distract us from maybe just finishing the Suez Canal. Then we don't have the ability to increase our population. But still, 8 of the 10 players wanted to push Politics of Strength. There was only Lambda who wanted to skip politics, and Funestus who made a decision to offer the acceptance of supremacy, I think, to either to Majondor or DANeo, but maybe just as a little gimmick, not because of accepting to actually getting this pact accepted. At the end, Dyrantropi's decision got chosen for this politics phase, and the Politics of Strength got seeded. And the event revealed is actually the inhabited territory, so another colony coming. At this point, we have knowledge, I think, about all of the H1 colonies. All of them are in the deck. And yeah, so our Isabella pick and Colossus play worked out very nicely, with the Suez Canal also being the first card in H2. So at this point, we had already some comments in the discussion. For example, Martin, who said that it's a bit unlucky that we got so lucky, or a bit unfortunate that we got so lucky in those early turns, because now the game is already over with the Suez Canal. He thought, no, there's no way that we are going to lose this game, and maybe it makes the project a little bit less interesting. So there were some comments already, but while we have the Suez Canal, we still have to fix some of our things. So yeah, let's see if that will be an easy victory for us at the end. The inhabited territory is revealed. There was a bit of discussion on whether we should actually aim towards bidding a lot for this. We had 1 bid for 4, 2 bids for 5, 1 bid for 6, 5 bids for 7, and 1 bid for 8. I think the 1 bid for 8 was actually from me. I just wanted to secure every colony that I can get. How much to bid for this colony also depends a little bit on the turn that will be planned, and that turn again also sparked a little bit of discussion in the discussion about the game. And I was one of the players who actually made a call to not finish the Suez Canal this turn. there were also some others who joined me in that. And if we are not finishing the Suez Canal, it's a lot easier to rebuild. However, if we are planning to finish the Suez Canal, we can't easily rebuild, and then the developed territory might just be lost. Maybe the 3 signs from the developed territory is just a lot more valuable for us at this point than the 1 population increase from the inhabited territory. At the end, a bit of 7 got chosen. Actually, my bid got chosen, the bid of 8, and with that we are at the end willing to able to win it and have to send an army and 1 resource away, but now having already 4 colonies available. And if we just finish the Suez Canal now, we would only be willing to rebuild 1 knight, which could also still be fine. So I think some of the players who actually wanted to finish the Suez Canal still were willing to bid 7 for this colony, but some weren't and rather wanted to win the developed territory. And now this turn, the players of the Hydra were divided between 2 main options. 5 of the players wanted to finish the Suez Canal this turn. And those players who wanted to finish the Suez Canal were Wartsinyets, Chengisib, Martapeshur, and Lambda. And also Dyrandropi. However, Dyrandropi was the only player who made the decision to finish the Suez Canal without the architecture. All of the other players made the decision to go with the architecture. However, the other 5 players made the decision to go with the Conmon and then just increase population, build the first step of the Suez Canal with the engineering genius, and rebuild the army so that we are strongest again and can again more nicely bid for the developed territory. That was definitely a decision that sparked again a big discussion, because it's definitely a big value loss to not finish the Suez Canal here, and but I was convinced, and I'm still convinced, that it is worth it to go for this Conmon in order to delay the Suez Canal. Because I do think we will have tons of resource production with the Suez Canal anyway. Of course, getting more earlier is always better, but we will have more than enough resource, I think, also when we finish the Suez Canal at the next turn. And I do think with getting this extremely strong Suez Canal, we are in a position where we maybe should play it a little bit safer. And for me personally, that meant taking the Conmon, making it certain that with finishing the Suez Canal, and it's important that we build the first step if we go for the Conmon, and as you can see, that's also the line that got chosen. It's important that we build the first step, because otherwise we don't have enough civil actions to finish the Suez Canal and then still develop the Conmon. So the first step has to be built, but if this first step is built, we can finish the Suez Canal at the next turn, get a developed territory, develop the Conmon, we have fixed our civil actions and we have fixed our military actions. And we still have 6 signs for the turn after, meaning if there's something like scientific method or journalism, we can just start building up a lot of resource science production. Maybe there's a wonder that we could build, but probably we don't necessarily want to build a wonder. And I just felt this position leaves us that leaves us in a nice position where we have our civil actions, military actions fixed, where we have the option to go into something like scientific method, and and also have our military actions going, because if we go for the architecture play, we at the next turn will have exactly 11 signs available with the additional signs from the developed territory. So if the Suez Canal is finished now, with Majondor having Theocracy and Conmon being available for cheap for DANeo, it should be likely that probably DANeo will go for the Conmon, meaning the Republic might be available for us at the next turn. But first of all, maybe there's a case for DANeo to take the Republic away, which could lead us to in a position where we actually have to stay in 4 civil actions for longer, and that could be extremely annoying. So just because of that, I think the Conmon could be an interesting safety pick. That was also the main reason why Irene, one of the players who went with the Conmon pick, went for this decision at the end. But even if the Republic is available, after having invested 6 signs into the architecture, I do think then investing 11 into the Republic and going down to 0 plus 2 signs, with being on 2 military actions, with already having missed out on the first copy of Rifleman and Cannon, the next copy of Cannon very likely also being gone, could just leave us in a position where we long term could really have some problems with the military. Martar, who was one of the big one of the players who really was heavily in favor of going for this architecture line, or with finishing the Suez Canal this turn, not going for the Conmon. He wasn't really afraid of any military push, and he might be right in what the short term belongs, because the players don't really have a lot of population, don't have a lot of resources, so they can't easily build up a lot of strength. But long term, they definitely might be able to build up some strength. Then you can maybe now start going for coal upgrades, And then at the end of H2, I don't think it's unreasonable that maybe one of the opponents has a bit of a threatening position, and with us going that low in science, investing six science into the architecture, and being on 2 military actions, I really felt like that could be one way how the game could go quite wrong for us, which is why I really wanted to go for the Conmon here. Also, the question is, with being on 0+2 science at the next turn, how do we invest our resources nicely? Martin suggested that maybe we just take every wonder that will come down the road and take and finish it, building Louvre, building Eiffel Tower, maybe building Railroad. Maybe that works out nicely, but I just thought it would be very nice to be able to go into scientific method or journalism or something, which is why if I would have finished the Suez Canal, I would have done it without the architecture like Darren Tropy, but actually the majority of the players who went with finishing the Suez Canal wanted to get the architecture going, and it might still be a nice technology to have, but with our low science, I just rather saw it as more sort of luxury tech than something that really need. So I was quite interested it was quite interesting for me to see that many players actually still made the decision to go for the architecture here. I maybe describe this turn now with my perspective, so if some of the players want to weigh in who want to go for the architecture, please definitely share your opinion in the comments, because I'm of course somewhat biased on the decisions that I made and my preferences for the game. At the end, the decision of Irene got chosen, the Conmon got picked, one stage of the Suez Canal got built, and then the Warrior got rebuilt, making us the strongest again. The next turn we have our Conmon guaranteed. Going, of course, the additional civil action from the Republic could be valuable with having that many resources. Every additional civil action could be nice to have. That was also one of the arguments, I think, from Martin, why he wanted to have the Republic instead of the Conmon. Or wasn't willing to delay the Suez Canal in order to have the Conmon over the Republic. But now I think just having military and civil actions fixed now at the next turn could just be quite strong. Also, with taking the Conmon away, Darwin will fall down to 1 civil action for DANeo. The Republic will be on an expensive spot for him to take, which is why I thought maybe that could lure DANeo into taking Darwin, and it might be the correct decision for him. It could be a strong leader, but it might be a leader that might be even stronger for Majondor, with having those 4 labs and printing presses and an arena lying around, and a Barbarossa that at the moment isn't doing anything. So maybe with taking the Conmon we can also lure DANeo into Darwin, which then results in Majondor not getting Darwin, and we also lure maybe DANeo into the Republic instead of the Conmon, meaning that in case he indeed will at some point go for some military pressure, late H2, early H3, he has only a few 3 military actions to work with the warfare instead of 5, which makes it a lot more difficult for him to punish us in the military. So now, but maybe I was too much focused on the military here. Maybe we should just play more efficient. Maybe more actions will be more important for us. So no, but I just felt a lot safer with having this Conmon in hand. However, second copy is revealed immediately, and with that, probably it wouldn't have been worth it to delay the Suez Canal with the second copy of Conmon being revealed immediately afterwards. So it probably in hindsight this play didn't work out too well. However, DANeo will indeed go for Darwin, goes for the Republic for 2, takes the coal in hand, doesn't go for an upgrade quite yet, actually builds an additional lab. With Darwin he gets an additional science and 2 more 1 more culture and 2 additional science production, and can still go for coal at the next turn, so he is also trying to build up a big economy here. Now it's Majondor's turn. He will take the second copy of cannons, takes the opera. He has a lot of printing presses, so maybe Shakespeare could be a strong option for him, maybe a way how he can somehow compete against this big Suez Canal, and then he just takes some yellow cards with the reserves and the breakthrough. Now it's our turn again. This time, I think there were maybe 1 player who wanted to offer the acceptance of supremacy. Let me just quickly check which player that was. And that was Irene, who made the decision to offer this pact. All of the others didn't want to share any information about our hand and just skip the politics phase. Of course, we definitely don't want to push the developed territory here into the deck. And no, then this turn, there was for most parts agreement on what to do, because most things I think are completely clear. We definitely want to finish the Suez Canal now. After getting science from the developed territory, we definitely want to go for the Conmon, and now, thanks to not having committed to the architecture, we have the chance to get into scientific method at the next turn. And with that, also all of the players made the decision to go for the scientific method. Only for the last civil action there was a little bit of variety. And here we had 4 players who wanted to go for Maria Theresa, 3 with not electing her, because Isabella's resource could still be nice to win the developed territory. 1 player, and I think that 1 player was Watsiniats, wanted to elect Maria already, while I, Chengisip and Arentropy just wanted to take Maria in hand. The other players just went with increasing the population. And I was one of the players who picked Maria, but I'm not totally certain if that was actually the correct choice here. So in contrast to the common pick, here I'm a lot less certain about. And the common pick is of course also completely debatable, but yeah, for Maria, I think Maria is offering us some benefits that are extremely valuable for us, but also some that are maybe not that valuable for us. I do think the additional science that we might get out of her will be extremely valuable. The additional resources maybe not that much. And the additional culture could be nice, but there is of course James Cook still in the deck. I just thought at the point of making the decision, we have now a chance to get a leader for only 1 civil action. At the next turn we would have 7 food saved up, meaning that we can increase our population a bunch of times and get quite a lot of value out of Maria, and getting a little bit of additional resource for the military could at the end still not be that, or quite fine maybe at the end. However, the first copy of selective breeding will be gone. Who knows when we will be able to get into food production, so she might not give us that many additional population on the long term, unless we get some food production going, but we don't have the most actions now that we are in Conmon and not in Republic. So it's the question on whether we can set up some food production when maybe there are some more urgent things to do, like going into scientific method, maybe grabbing the last copy of Rifleman could be important to at least have some military techs available. So I think Maria Theresa as leader, that could work perfectly fine here, and she's available now for 1 civil action, so I think it's fine to take her, but in hindsight maybe I would have also just gone with increasing population, because Cook is just so extremely strong here, and maybe also leaving ourselves open for Napoleon could be fine. Also Antoni Gaudi could be a fine leader to get a bit of culture, but also just leaving ourselves open for Cook is maybe more important. But 4 of the players, and I was one of them, wanted to go for Maria Theresa. I do think it could work out fine. But the 6 other players went with just increasing the population for the last civil action. And here, for the first time of this project, the Wheel of Doom actually made a decision that the turn of Martin Pêcheur was chosen. And he was one of the players who wanted to increase the population and then also build an additional knight, which is only possible. One big danger with going for the Maria play is also that there's maybe still a small chance that there could be reds coming. One of those events is the developed territory, the other one could be reds, and if the red should be revealed, that of course could be a disaster with having 7 food saved up, so maybe also a reason enough to not go for Maria here, but we had 4 players who were willing to go for her. Then we will draw 3 cards this turn: the Scientific Corporation, the Raid, and the Ravages of Time. DANeo seeds, and the developed territory is revealed, so another colony, and again we are able to win it actually, but again there were some who maybe didn't want to bid as much for it. Actually, no, for the developed territory 1, because of the science being that valuable, we had actually 6 bids for 6, we had 2 bids for 7, and we had 2 bids for 8. The players who were willing to bid 7 were I and Chengisip. The player who actually were willing to bid 8 were Wolves in PV4. Again, I in PV4, we had a lot of colony bids, so there was actually a little bit of data gathered on which players were maybe willing to bid more often, and I in PV4 I think were definitely one of the players who bid a lot for the colonies. If that is the right thing or not might be debatable, but I mean, with having Suez Cannon, potentially getting Cook, and also with still this 3 science being quite valuable for us, I do think it's nice to just bid a lot for this colony. And at the end, Arentropy's bid was chosen for 6, but it is enough to win it at the end, and we win it just for 1 unit, but 6 resources are paid. But with having Isabella and a big Suez Cannon production, those 6 resources are not that big of a price for us actually. So this colony is won by us. DANeo goes for the coal, takes the selective breeding, takes the railroad. With the railroad he also maybe can aim towards setting up a very big resource production relatively soon, and he also takes the journalism in hand, which can potentially be nice for Darwin at some point. At the moment he doesn't really have the most population for it. Majondor seeds while being the weakest, but maybe he had knowledge about the last event. A good harvest is revealed, so no reds, instead a good harvest, and the additional food with our big yellow bank is extremely helpful for us. And then Majondor, with the additional food, can go for 1 more Barbarossa activation, will disband the warrior, take the revolutionary idea, take the strategy, and develop the strategy. And this turn has quite some consequences for DANeo actually, or some potentially, or somewhat bad consequences. because there's one H1 event on top, and let's talk about this when it will be revealed, but keep in mind that Majondor actually made a decision to take Famine here for this turn. Now it is our turn, and there was the decision on what to do for the politics phase. And we had some different options here. We have some pacts that we can offer, we have an event that we can see, and of course there's also the chance to just skip the politics phase. And the majority decision was to offer the scientific cooperation to Majondor. Maybe he will accept it, and I do think it can generate some relatively equal value for us, and then it just can be a nice pact to have against DANeo, giving both of us a bit of additional value. And so 6 of the players went with offering the pact. I also was one of the players who offered a pact. 3 just wanted to skip the politics, didn't want to have the scientific cooperation pact, and didn't want to see it. And then there was one player, Lambda, who actually made the decision to see the Ravages of Time, which caused a little bit of upset, because by the other players there was mainly agreement that it definitely shouldn't be pushed here, because if this top event is the Reds, we would have lost 7 food, which could have been quite bad. Of course, you could argue that we have a big yellow bang, and maybe losing that much food isn't that bad, but we also don't have any additional food production. I do think losing all of those population could be quite bad. We have such a big production, and being able to build something like journalism, multimedia, movies, operas at some point could be extremely valuable. So losing the food here, I think, could be extremely costly. However, Lambda also had a little bit of a unique turn, because he was one of the players who really just wanted to make sure to get cooked this turn, and he also wasn't willing to delay the scientific method upgrades. So the reasoning why he was actually willing to push as the only player is that he wouldn't have increased his population that much anyway, but the majority wanted to play around reds a little bit more here. At the end, the Borziniot's decision for politics got chosen, and the scientific cooperation pact was offered to Majondor, but he at the end rejected it anyway. And in this turn, we have again a lot of different turns that were suggested, and there were some different things that maybe were prioritized differently, because so basically I always did some summaries after all turns were submitted, and for this summary I made a decision on taking a little bit of a look what things were prioritized, because one important thing for the turn could be to take the Rifleman. If we don't take it, we missed out on cannons and Rifleman, and I do think I'm convinced that the Riflemen have to be taken here, because Majondor, if he gets Napoleon, Rifleman, and has the defensive army tactic, out of the sudden it could be looking very, very dangerous for us. So I was one of the players who were convinced that the Rifleman just has to be taken here. And then it was a bit of a question, after having already spent 2 civil actions in the Rifleman, are the players willing to maybe go into scientific method upgrade still, even if it means that maybe we can't increase population as much as it would be possible, and then maybe are a bit more vulnerable to the rats. And 5 players actually only took the Rifleman and weren't willing to go for the scientific method. Those players just increased the population 3 times, but there was a bit of variety. 3 out of the 5 players who only went for Rifleman and didn't go for scientific method increased population 3 times and then took the frugality. I was one of them. I just wanted to play around reds. I wanted to have a lot of population and was willing, with now having also gotten the 3 additional signs from the developed territory, to delay the scientific method, also with having in mind that there's still a copy of journalism, which maybe could be the preferable technology potentially, even though going for both scientific method and journalism might be totally achievable for us. So I and Irene and Motta Peshur were the players who went for Rifleman, increasing population 3 times and taking frugality. There were also 2 players, and here maybe we can finally see a little bit of the military player coming out in Chengisib, because Chengisib and Borziniot's, no, actually not. That will only happen a little bit later. So for this turn, Borziniot's and Wolves were the player. And Borziniot's is maybe also a player who has some tendencies to go for a bit of a military push if there's the opportunity for it. He made a decision to, instead of taking the frugality with the last civil action, develop the Rifleman and build a Knight and Rifleman. Really going for a bit of a strength increase, and with that putting a bit of pressure on DANeo, who can't finish the railroad, maybe has to go for Rifleman. I do think it could leave him in a bit of an awkward position. So Watsinians and also Wolves thought that it could be nice here to maybe put some military pressure on our opponents. And then, yeah, those were the turns that we had where only Rifleman got taken. But then we had also some players, and I do think that's also a very reasonable line, who wanted to secure Rifleman, but also were willing to go for a scientific method upgrade and then just increasing population 2 times. I think a very solid line here. And those players who were willing to do that were Chengisip, PV4 and Funestus. And at the end we had 2 players who actually were willing to pass on the Rifleman. However, one of the players, Dyrantropy, said afterwards, after it was pointed out that Rifleman plus Napoleon plus defensive army could be an extremely dangerous line for us if Majondor gets this. Then he changed his mind and thought maybe the Riflemen actually have to be taken, but Dyrantropy here went with a turn of just taking and electing Cook and increasing population 3 times, just wanting to secure Cook. Cook at this point, with having 6 colonies, is giving us 7 culture reduction per turn. That just is a lot of value, and it's just a very easy way for us to maybe overcome the small culture gap that we are at the moment still having to our opponents. So he was willing to secure Cook, increase his population 3 times, and then we had Lambda, and I talked about it at the beginning. He was the player who was willing to see the Ravages of Time, and the reason for that was that his turn was looking, he went for a turn with taking, electing Cook, increasing pop once, and then going for 1 scientific method upgrade. And no, which is maybe also not bad, but I do think it's not that likely that Cook will be denied. Majondor could go for Napoleon if he wants to go for military push. Shakespeare, Gaudi could be really strong leaders for him. Maybe he will deny Cook, but if that should happen, he's a bad leader. Maybe we can then go for either Napoleon if we want to go for strength push. We will have our Colossus draws soon, or we could just go for Anthony Gaudi and maybe for journalism, so operas, and also have a solid leader. So I didn't see the necessity to pay that many civil actions for Cook, but on the other hand, Cook is just insanely strong, so just securing him here for ourselves is maybe not too bad. At the end, the turn that was chosen was the turn from PV4, and PV4 was one of the players who took the Rifleman, but also was willing to go for the scientific method upgrade here, building another knight, going up to 11 strength, using the free military action, and then increasing the population once, not perfectly preparing for reds, but securing the Rifleman and getting the much needed science production going. Then we draw the international agreement, the promise of military protection and the popularization of science. DANeo this turn will go for the architecture, builds 3 stages of the railroad already, and maybe he couldn't have that easily done it if he would have gone for the military line of Watsonians and Wolves with going for another army with building a Rifleman. Then we would be at 17 strength, and DANeo would actually need 3 H2 defense cards. DANeo this turn will develop 2 technologies, which makes it a little bit look like maybe arms industry could be coming at some point, or he just wants to spend his civil actions effectively. And now Majondor will push, and an event will be revealed that is a bit unfortunate for DANeo, because the top event was seeded by DANeo, and it is actually the Barbarians. And as you can see, DANeo has slightly more culture than Majondor, but the reason why he has slightly more culture is because Majondor was actually willing to take the famine. So willingly or not, Majondor, with having the famine, actually prepared for the Barbarians. Now DANeo has to lose a population, which is definitely a bit of an annoying setback for him. And with that, it also is now certain that there are no reds on top, which I think is a good news for us. Majondor will not go for the Cook denial, instead goes for Shakespeare. Thinks that maybe going for Shakespeare could be a way to actually fight against this extremely strong Suez Canal Cook setup. So he is going for Shakespeare and then also for 1 upgrade to selective breeding. Then it is our turn again. We are the strongest, but before this our turn, we will actually draw some additional cards from the Colossus, the Armed Intervention, the Impact of Architecture, and also a colonization card. And for this turn, we really had a very big variety of options on what to do with politics. We are the strongest, so there was agreement that we should cede. And 8 of the players made the decision to go for the Ravages of Time. However, 2 players made the decision to see the Impact of Architecture, and those players were Dyrantropy and Watsinians. And probably the Impact of Architecture is the better card for us to see it, because with our brick production we have really a nice opportunity to build up a lot of buildings. But with having the Colossus, the Ravages of Time should be nice for us as well, and the reason why I didn't want to see the Impact of Architecture yet is that maybe that could also be a nice impact to keep in hand for a while, because it might get really the strongest late in H3 or in H4, when we really had time to invest all our resources into a lot of urban buildings, and then maybe if it is revealed too early, it is not as strong as it could have been. So I rather wanted to commit to the Ravages of Time here, but seeding the impact of architecture is also perfectly fine. And there's an event revealed that we seeded earlier, the Politics of Strength, and now we have even more cards in hand. And for the end of this turn, it was actually quite interesting to see what cards the players wanted to keep in hand. And yeah, now it is our turn, and the first few actions were actually completely clear. At least the first action was completely clear with going for James Cook. And yeah, James Cook, as you will see, will improve our culture production from 1 to 8. So the first two actions were completely locked in by all players. Of course, no player made the decision to not go for Cook here. And then there was again a little bit of a variety. There were 4 journalism guys. I was one of them. The others were Irene, Dyrantropy, and Wolves, who just made a decision to build 1 journalism. And then, with the last civil action, those players just increased population and built a warrior to get stronger again. I was the only one of those journalism players who made the decision to build a journalism and go for a scientific method upgrade. We have just enough resources for it, 8 for building a journalism, 5 for going for the scientific method upgrade. I just wanted to invest our resource as much as possible, and as quickly as possible. We are not the weakest, at least, so I felt like staying at 11 strength is fine. And there was one reason why I really liked going for this lab upgrade instead of increasing population with the last civil action. That is that after investing 6 science into the journalism, if we only build a journalism, we are at 6 production, 2 plus 6 is 8, but if we also go for this upgrade, we are at 8 production, 2 plus 8 is 10. And I think there's one technology in H3 that would just give us an incredibly big boost if we should get it, and that is the civil service. Because a limiting factor to us could really be our civil action count to invest our resources nicely here. And so I really felt like, even though it's not that likely that the civil service will be available, just for the chance it will be, and just because getting the science production might be nice anyway, I really wanted to get this scientific method upgrade going here in addition to the journalism, because then we are at 8 science production, we are at 10 culture production, we are prepared for the civil service, and we have those journalisms, meaning we can maybe just build more of them at the following turns, maybe use the freedom of movement to build use a military unit to put into journalism, then rebuild the military unit with a military action instead of a civil action, saving us even more civil action. So I really like this journalism line, and I just think it would be a very strong line. Some other players didn't like it that much, saying that maybe they rather would prefer to go into multimedia directly. Some other players went with turns where they took opera. We had 2 opera players who played just went for a lab upgrade and then took, I think, breakthrough and the opera with the remaining civil actions. And those opera players were Lambda and Funestus, who rather wanted to have opera, but journalism is available cheaper. We have at the moment enough yellow tokens so that we don't really need the opera, the happy face from the opera in the near future. There is, of course, the Hollywood in the game. For that, the opera could be nice, but the same as we can go for multimedia, we can also go for movies. So I just felt like it's just fine to go for the cheaper option here, go for journalisms, then maybe go for movies instead of paying more civil actions to take the opera, just to leave ourselves open for multimedia. And I really, really liked it to have enough science to get into the civil service at the next turn. And some of the other players' turns, for example, taking the breakthrough in the opera, also achieved that with just not investing science into journalism. So there were some other turns apart from me who prepared nicely for the civil service. We then had also a turn from PV4 who took the journalism in hand but wasn't willing to invest into them immediately. Instead increased population, went for an upgrade and took the breakthrough, I think. And then we had 2 Rifleman guys, and now we maybe see for the first time the military player in Jengisib comes maybe to light, because Vatsinets, like in the turn before, Vatsinets also already wanted to go for Rifleman. Vatsinets and Jengisib really wanted to invest into Rifleman and build one, while also building an additional scientific method, just getting a lot of science production going, and then with the remaining civil action just I think that's all just increasing population, building a developing rifleman, building a new scientific method, and taking breakthrough. Just putting a bit of pressure on our opponents. DANeo maybe still a bit vulnerable. He can maybe finish the railroad, but I mean he can get a bit stronger. So it's the question: do we really want to commit a bit of science and resource into rifleman here when we can just start investing resource into some nice peaceful options? I'm still convinced by my journalism turn with going for the scientific method upgrade. The other players will probably still, or at least partly, be convinced by their turns. Definitely a lot of potentially strong options here. But Watsinius and Cengiz went with the Rifleman line, and then there was also one very specific line that was chosen, which maybe partly was maybe partly for fun, because Martin Pecheur actually made the decision after going for Cook to go for scientific method upgrade and then take the team sports for 3 as a denial pick from DANeo, which definitely could cause some really big issues for him, especially also with losing a population. He has some really big uprising issues, and Marta also found it just a little bit annoying, the thought about how DANeo will talk about this in his videos and maybe will be annoyed by it. So I'm not sure how much this team sports denial was influenced by such thoughts and how much it was influenced by really thinking that it is the strongest turn, but Martin committed a turn of denying the team sports here, and we will see at DANeo's turn that we can be very, very lucky that this turn didn't got chosen, because at the end the team sports won't even be taken by DANeo. So luckily the team sports denial here wasn't the turn that was chosen by the Wheel of Doom. Instead, the turn that was chosen was the turn by Cengizib, meaning that we will actually go for Rifleman here, building one, increasing population, building an additional lab, taking the breakthrough, and with that we are being at 16 strength. And it can maybe be nice having a bit of military pressure, using the free military action, still getting a decent amount of science production going. But here I'm not really convinced by it. Maybe it can be fine. We have a war in hand. We definitely could start building up some military, but we don't have a tactic. So I, at this point, would rather try to catch up the culture by some peaceful options. And I also don't like it that we don't have enough science for the civil service, because that could just be a card that could give us such a big boost, which is why I really like those options the most, which leave ourselves open for the civil service. Maybe I'm putting too much weight on it, and actually the civil service will be available the next turn, where I then was very annoyed, but I was already, before knowing whether this card will be available, putting really a bit of weight on being prepared for that, as just building a journalism and going for a scientific method upgrade I think would also be a very fine turn, just without a civil service being revealed. At the end of our turn, we have tons of cards in hand, and it was actually quite interesting to see which different cards were the players decided to keep. And I counted on which card was chosen how often it was kept by a player. All 10 players kept the impact of architecture, which makes sense. All 10 players decided to at least keep this one war over culture, which makes sense. 8 players kept the defense card. 5 players kept the popularization of science, which is also an event that if we maybe get multimedia can give us a really nice culture benefit. 3 players, and one of them was Cengizib, so we will actually keep it in hand, kept the international agreement. Maybe saving the civil actions could be quite strong, even though missing out in a politics phase and not being able to see an impact would also be quite a big cost. One wanted to keep the scientific cooperation. One wanted to keep the raid 2, I think that was Watsinius, who also was one of the players who went for this more aggressive line, was also willing to follow that up with keeping the raid 2 in hand. One wanted to keep the impact of happiness, I think that was Mortar if I remembered correctly. And one wanted to keep the impact of agriculture, that was Wolves. But when we take a look at our hand, we actually don't have the impact of agriculture in hand, but I of course couldn't my team members or the participating players, I could of course submit the information about our politics cards per screenshot, but if we have that many cards in hand, maybe this impact of industry here could look like an impact of agriculture. Maybe he mixed it up and he would have liked to keep the impact of agriculture, but sadly that wasn't an option because we actually don't have that card in our hand. And at the end, Cengizib made a decision to keep the war, the impact of architecture, popularization of science, and the international agreement was one of the 2 players who were willing to actually discard the defense card. We draw another war, a blunder, and also the impact of technology. DANeo at his turn seeds and opens the vast territory too. And yeah, here again some bits had to be committed, and we had 5 bits for 10, 4 for 8, and 1 bit for 6. And I was one of the ones who bid 10. Funestus was the one who bid 6, but I think he wrote afterwards that maybe he made it too quickly and there should definitely be a higher amount be bid. Maybe he forgot about Cook or something. I think he just committed a medieval army without using Cook. So I think 8 committing a medieval army tactic and 2 cards from Cook should be the minimum, but maybe 10 with being willing to commit 2 cards with Cook and a Knights and a Rifleman is also very reasonable, and at the end was probably the right bid because it just let DANeo pay more for this colony, and with winning this colony, DANeo doesn't really need the team sports any longer, so luckily we didn't go for Martor's preferred team sports denial. DANeo, interestingly, is willing to grab Marlene Dietrich for 3 civil actions here, and probably will then also take the opera. She can be a strong leader, can maybe help him with the military. He then finishes the railroad, plays the patriotism, builds a rifleman, takes the opera, takes the urban growth, and because of having lost to the politics of strength, he won't draw any new cards, meaning he could actually potentially be in a vulnerable spot. He just sent some colonization cards away, 2 cards for the vast territory. He won't get any new draws. He needs another defense card if he wants to defend against an aggression from us, and out of the sudden, maybe going for the rifleman could actually have quite some positive effects for us, with DANeo maybe leaving himself a bit vulnerable, just maybe because the vast territory is so important. So at the next turn, maybe going for this blunder could be a very strong option for us. Majondor will go for the opera, starts some Shakespeare culture production, destroys the lab, goes up to 14 culture production, takes the reserves and a rich land for the second farm upgrade. Now it's our turn, and for our politics phase, there was the big decision: do we want to go for a blunder, or do we actually want to seed an event into the deck? And for this decision, we had 6 players who wanted to go for the blunder against DANeo, 3 wanted to seed a popularization of science. Those 3 players were PV4, Diandropi, and Funestus, and then there was one player who wanted to seed impact of technology first, that was Irene. And PV4's decision got chosen. We went with the popularization of science, but if I remembered correctly, and I do recall some things out of memory because I didn't check all of the discussions again that we had because we had a lot of discussions, which was very nice. But if I recall it correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, PV4 mentioned that he missed out that DANeo didn't have any draws at the turn before, and with that I actually also maybe would have preferred to go for the blunder, but here we see it. And after the game was over and I checked the replay again, then of course I was curious. Would have DANeo had the defense card to defend himself, or wouldn't he have? And he would have had the defense card, but he would have to discard his whole hand in order to defend, meaning he had 2 tactics and a defense card, so he would have lost a tactic if he wanted to defend. And from what I've seen from this one video that I checked out now afterwards, it was a tough decision for him, but he was hoping that maybe we don't want to miss out on seeding a strong impact. We had that many draws, so we might have a lot of impacts that just give us some safe cultures, so maybe why go for the aggression. But 6 of the players wanted to go for the blunder. The Wheel of Doom had something different in mind, and maybe DANeo would have been willing to discard the tactics. Maybe we need at the end our politics phase to score some culture, but at the end we will push the popularization of science. Maybe that event is not that strong for us, and I think going for the blunder here, I was one of the players who preferred going for the blunder just because of the chance of getting a really big blow against DANeo. And as we now saw when taking a look at DANeo's video, even if the blunder should fail, just discarding those cards also can be a very big cost to DANeo. So with maybe the popularization of science being not that much of an influential event as maybe some of the impacts could be, and it could maybe still be nice to keep impact of architecture and technology in hand to see them revealed a bit later when we have more time to prepare for them. I think a blunder here could have just been a very interesting decision. Now we have a turn ahead of us with a lot of different options. There's a civil service in the row. I was immediately very annoyed remembering that if we would have gone for my line, we would have been able to go for the civil service here. Probably those words were spoken quite often by a lot of players when there are some situations where they didn't would find themselves in normally and wouldn't have maybe been there if the turns were chosen that they would have preferred. This time was one of the moments again where I thought, why don't we have 10 signs available? And we have the internet available, so wonder, there's the democracy, there's the fundamentalism, there's a copy of reserves, there's a copy of movies, there's a copy of multimedia. One of my reasons why I wanted to go for the blunders actually that I first planned to build a multimedia this turn, and then I would have preferred to see the freedom of movement revealed after our turn so that we can maybe put a scientific method into multimedia, for example, but now the freedom of movement was revealed already. And this time, I think it was the first time that we actually had 9 completely different turns. So not a single variation that was chosen 2 times, really showcasing how difficult those H3 turns are and how different the preferences are on how to approach now the situation. And instead of just showcasing every single turn, I made a list of which civil actions were chosen how often by the players to maybe get a bit of an idea which cards were valued how highly by the players. First of all, there was of course the freedom of movement to be resolved, and this time we had only 9 submissions for turns because Funestus at this point was on holidays, so he didn't take part in this turn. 6 of the 9 players made a decision to move a philosophy into scientific method, just saving a civil action. That was also the one thing that got chosen at the end by the Wheel of Doom. Then we had 2 players who went with moving a warrior into the agriculture, just getting a bit of more food production going, and then maybe planning on rebuilding this warrior directly as a rifleman, for example. And 1 player, that was Mortabecheur, went with moving an iron mine into the rifleman, just maybe saying we don't really need that 12 resource production as much anyway, and yeah, maybe that could also be an interesting choice. Then for the actions, we have a lot of different actions that were chosen for the turn. 7 players upgraded this warrior to rifleman. That is also what we're seeing here, so that was chosen very often by the players. Then we had 5 players who took civil service, so a technology that even though we can't go into it immediately was still highly valued by a lot of players because going up to 8 civil actions could just make us a lot more flexible. 4 players took the multimedia, just a very nice thing to invest our resource into, also nicely synergizing with the popularization of science and with the impact of technology that we have in hand, as well as of course as the impact of architecture. 4 players took the democracy, and I do think most of them were players who didn't take the civil service. It's an alternative way to get an additional civil action while also increasing our cultural production and increasing our urban building limit. 3 players took the internet, just committing to a wonder for certain instead of maybe missing out on the Hollywood, which could be taken by Majondor and then being dependent on the spaceflight drop. We definitely have the means of making this internet quite big, and I was actually one of the players who went for the internet at the end instead of going for multimedia directly, which was my preferred line, but after the freedom of movement was revealed, I didn't want to go for that any longer. Maybe the internet would have been the better call, even with the freedom of movement still being the deck. 3 increased the population 1 time. 2 made a decision to take movies. 2 upgraded a lab with a civil action instead of the freedom of movement. 1 player took the team sports. 1 player took the reserves. 1 player increased the population a 2nd time. I think Watznietz was a player who took the reserves, increased population 2 times, and again went a bit more into a military focused direction. 1 player took the rockets for 3, and I do think it maybe was Chengisip's turn. I do think Chengisip submitted a turn with taking rockets and fundamentalism. So fundamentalism was also chosen by 1 player. And 1 player, that was Dyrantropy, made a decision to actually just stick with the line that I originally preferred with just building a multimedia, and that requires all of the civil actions. And then 1 player built a rifleman instead of upgrading after having put a warrior into farms. So I found it quite funny how many different things were considered by this many strong players, and yeah, so quite just very nice to see how big the variety is. I, for this turn, went with taking the multimedia and taking the internet. I do think it's nice to have the internet and getting a safe way how we can score a lot of points. And the multimedia works nicely with the internet, the impact of technology, the popularization of science. So that was my preferred line. but yeah, also some other lines, of course, make a lot of sense. I do think the civil service could still be very nice to have. Maybe the democracy for the increased urban building limit could be nice to have. At the end, the turn that was chosen was the turn by PV4, and he went with the internet, but instead of the multimedia, he instead wanted to have the movies and the democracy. Movies maybe not synergizing as nicely with the internet as the multimedia, but it allows to also grab the democracy to maybe at some point get the increased urban building limit in the civil action. So I do think this is also a fine turn, not that big of a variation. With the popularization of science coming and the impact of tech in hand, I was in preference of the multimedia, but movies plus democracy plus internet. Also a fine turn. We don't take the civil service here, staying on 6 civil actions for now. That was criticized by some players later on. So yeah, definitely a lot of options, and also again some more military heavy options committed. And here we are noticing something that maybe is one of the problems with this Hydra gameplay, and that is that at this point we were maybe switching a little bit directions. At the turn before we went with those riflemen, going a bit into a military heavy direction, only to then not follow it up with a blunder, and now going for internet, movies, democracy. So here the player preferences are maybe it's like pulling a rope into different directions. I think like that it was described by one player in the discussion, and it might be true, and maybe a bit of a problem that the strategic planning, long-term planning of this mode and on how we're playing with the Hydra is maybe a bit limited, even though of course all are very strong players and can adapt to different situations. Still, they have their preferences, and now we are still, like, after having gone for those riflemen, which cost us the option to go for the civil service, which I think would have been extremely strong. But now, nonetheless, we are again pulling heavily towards a peaceful direction. At the end of the turn, there was again the decision to be made on which cards to keep. Only 8 players submitted which cards to keep, 1 forgot, and 1 Funistus was on holidays. 8 wanted to keep Impact of Tech, 8 wanted to keep 1 War, 6 wanted to keep Impact of Architecture, 5 kept the Plunder, 4 kept the Second War, and 1 kept the International Agreement. So again, a lot of variety, and depending on how military heavy your plan is, of course, you want to keep maybe both Wars and the Plunder and discard an Impact, but most wanted to keep both Impacts, but also 1 War to at least have a little bit of flexibility. And the PV4 kept those cards in hand. We draw the International Tourism, the Shock Troops. So finally we have a tactic that we can work with, and that maybe could be a strong tactic potentially. DANeo, with us not taking the civil service, will go for it, has even more civil actions available, will go for the journalism, builds one, takes the reserves, takes another reserves, and takes this copy of multimedia. Then we have Majondor's turn, and here this turn will go for 1 upgrade to his farms, takes the Hollywood, takes Fleming, takes the Air Forces, being a bit safe from the military, and also he can build a very strong Hollywood, and at this point we are still behind in culture, and while we have this internet, it's definitely not as clear of a situation as maybe some have envisioned when we got this early Suez Canal earlier on. Now it's our turn again. The question was how to use the politics phase, and 8 made the decision to offer the international tourism to DANeo. At this point in the discussions, it was definitely named that maybe Majondor is the main contender here. He's the biggest culture production. He has the Hollywood with Fleming, so the international tourism offered the benefit of maybe getting some culture against him, even though of course DANeo will also get a bit of culture production out of it. But there were 2 players who went with something different, and 2 wanted to see the impact of architecture. But at the end, the offer of the international tourism was chosen by the Wheel of Doom. It was the decision by Lambda that got chosen, and with that, at our turn, we offered the international tourism as our politics action. This turn we had a lot more agreement than at the turn before, where it has gone completely wild with all of those different options, and for 5 of the 6 actions we actually had complete agreement. Or actually not complete agreement, 8 from 10 agreed on 5 of the 6 options. 8 of the 10 players went with those following 5 options: developing the engineering, increasing population, developing the movies, building 1 movie. Relatively straightforward: increasing culture production, getting the engineering, which still has the potential to save us a lot of resources, and at the end also some civil actions which might be relevant. So a very strong technology to get now. And then for those 8 players who went with this line, there was the question on how to use the last civil action. And the majority went with military theory, just still a nice technology to have for some impacts, and also maybe keeping some hopes alive to go for war over culture here. 2 went with disbanding a knight and building a second movie, just completely doubling down on culture production, going up to 18 culture production already, saying that maybe the knight is not really that much needed, we still get 3 draws and we have just enough resource to build a second movie to go up to 18 culture production. Those 2 players who went with disbanding the mine were PV4 and Mortar Pêcheur. And then we have one player, and it was I, who made the decision to take the pro sports with the last civil action. My first instinct was also to take the military theory here, but I just, on one hand, even though we are a little bit behind, I was, with impact of architecture technology, and maybe the chance to draw more good impacts, I was somewhat confident, or relatively confident, that we can win this game peacefully, that we don't need the military theory also not to defend ourselves. Of course, the military theory could also be nice for some impacts if the game stays peaceful, and keeping up some options is nice, but I just felt like, when we think about leader, what we will be getting, DANeo has committed to Marlene, Majondor is committed to Flaming, so we will have the free choice, and there's Pierre coming down the row. Cook is producing a lot of cultures, so we want to keep him very long, meaning when we then at the end elect Pierre, get the Olympic Games, we get a one big culture, just a 1 of 8 culture from him, which is very nice to then maybe elect him very late. And Bro Sports and Pierre just score a lot of points for the internet, works very nicely for the impact of architecture that we are having in hand, is also cheap technology for the impact of technology. So I really wanted to secure this Bro Sports here, as I thought that might increase our chances quite a bit to just at the end score as much points with the internet and the impact of architecture, that we can just win this game, that we don't have to rely on the military theory and maybe the option of going for a war at some point. So that was my idea. The others also thought about this. Maybe we are fine with waiting for the second copy of Bro Sports, but now we have a chance to take it for 1. Who knows if it is late and then maybe has to take more expensive, or it's just too late and we can't implement it in our last turn. And I think it definitely could happen, and I just thought it could be nice to take the Bro Sports. And I do think it is a very, very solid pick, but taking the military theory is also fine. Then, as I said, there were also 2 players who committed a different line and didn't go for those 5 actions. We had Lambda, who actually went for movies but without engineering, just taking engineering and I think military theory in hand. And then we had a more military focused turn by Wolves, who actually went with taking military theory, engineering, and I think also the pro sports. If I remember it correctly, let me just quickly check that I don't talk anything wrong. Yes, take develop military theory, take engineering, take bro spots, increase population 2 times, and build a knight. So he wanted to have the military theory developed. He didn't want to commit to those movies yet, which is understandable. We have a war in hand, we have now this tactic, so a military push can work out well, but we can maybe only hit one of the players. At least it's looking like that at the moment. Maybe hitting Majondor is fine, because if he can't finish the Hollywood, maybe then we will get enough culture to also finish before DANeo. And so he wanted to go for this military push, but I also think it is maybe undermining our ability to win completely peacefully, which I at this point was still convinced is definitely there with going for Bro Sports and Pierre. And at the end, my turn was actually the chosen one, so with the last civil action, we went with Bro Sports here. And I made a decision to keep the 2 impacts, the tactic and the war. We actually draw 2 more wars, and we have already seen even more wars, so at this point there's only 1 copy of War Culture and 1 copy of Hybrid War left in the deck that we don't have knowledge about. Now it is DANeo's turn, and he will seed, opens the crime wave, which is nice to see for us, some culture lost by our opponents. He will go for the space flight, a wonder that has some potential for him, goes for the mechanized agriculture. The good thing is he can't deny Pierre from us, because he can't take Chaplin or Churchill away, so Pierre is guaranteed to be available for us, which was a big part of the reasoning why I was willing to take the Bro Sports. DANeo then goes for second journalism, goes up to 12 culture production, takes the satellites and ends his turn. Him going for civil service over code of laws, now taking the satellites while having cartography, I do think is an indicator that maybe he has the impact of progress in hand, or maybe has already seeded it. Now it's Majondor's turn, he doesn't push, plays the wave of nationalism, gets a bit stronger, takes the multimedia in hand, makes sure to get this copy, otherwise we could likely take it away for our internet, but he wants to have it in hand to maybe make the Hollywood potentially quite big. And then he reveals the entrenchments tactic, is now at 17 strength. Now it is our turn, and we have to decide in the politics phase, and already this time before the turns were submitted there, was a little bit of a discussion going on because Lambda was a little bit annoyed by not having the military theory available, which is understandable. We have this tactic, we have lots of wars, there are no tanks available, so now it could have been an option to maybe go heavily into military, which is now not available. However, PV4 and Mortar and also myself, of course, defended my action with yeah, just being convinced that a peaceful win in this game is completely possible. And then, so there was a little bit of a discussion going on how close will it be from now on. There were some calculations done, and Dyrantropy was one of the players who felt like it could get quite a bit closer. Mortar PV4 were more convinced that maybe the position should be good enough to just win this game peacefully. I also was convinced that we have solid chances or good chances to win this game peacefully without any war, but Lambda and Dyrantropy thought it could get a bit closer, and Lambda thought it could have been very nice to have the military theory now in hand and maybe the option to set up for a war at the next turn, for example. So there was a bit of discussion going on. And yeah, then of course we have to make a decision on the politics phase again, and it was relatively clear that we want to see it. We can't really go for a war this turn without a military theory. And 8 players wanted to see the impact of architecture, 2 the impact of technology. I was actually one of the players who wanted to see the impact of technology, but I relatively quickly realized that maybe I rather want to see the impact of architecture here. I do think it's the impact that gives us more points against both players. And the reason why I wanted to see the impact of tech is because I thought maybe it could be a big impact against Majondor, and I was still looking very much at Majondor on the player who maybe is the biggest contender for the win here. But during those calculations, it also, those firstly were done mainly for Majondor and us, but then definitely some players noticed, don't forget about DANeo, he has the space flight, he has some nice impact, so yeah, DANeo definitely is also completely in the game here. We are still behind him in culture. He has also a strong wonder. He might have some nice impacts. So I think it's better to see the impact that maybe it could be at the end be nice against both players. Dyrantropy was the other player who wanted to see the impact of tech. His reasoning was that maybe there's a bigger chance that the impact of tech will be improved more on our last turn, so it could be more painful just in case it is revealed earlier, but likely in both impacts will end in the next deck anyway. At the end, probably both impacts will be seeded anyway, but maybe then it's just better to commit to the potentially better impact, which is why I think probably the impact of architecture would have been the better choice here. But the Wheel of Doom chose Dyrantropy as the player whose decision was committed, and that meant that we seeded the impact of technology here. The popularization of science is revealed. It was seeded by us and gives DANeo now the most culture, allowing him to catch up quite a bit on Majondor. And then this turn, I think, was also almost completely clear for all players. That was one of the 2 turns where I predicted when I always wrote my turn down before, also just like all the other players. Before then I took a look at the other players' turns, and there were 2 times in the game where I suspected that maybe there's a chance we could have full agreement. The first time was when we took the Suez Canal, but then there were 3 players who used the Engineering Genius on the first step instead of increasing population. And this time I also suspected that maybe we could have full agreement, and we almost had full agreement because we will build 2 movies. We will take Pierre with the arenas. I think in the internet Pierre is just the best choice, plus the Olympic Games. And then 9 of the 10 players went with the reserves. That was also the line that I had chosen. But one player, Wolves, made actually the decision to develop the Bro Sports already. Maybe being more civil action efficient, maybe slowing down the row. I don't know what his concrete reasons were. Maybe those are fine arguments, slowing down the row and being more civil action efficient. The civil action efficiency is maybe not that big of a reason. I do think those couple of reserves can be quite strong for us. At first look, maybe to get another population out, that could be very nice. But maybe at the end the reserves could be more valuable to just play it for 4 resources, because with the engineering, every 4D resources will mean additional Bro Sports, and with having the internet, Pierre, and the impact of architecture, every Bro Sports means a lot of points. So I think the reserves is maybe just too important to not take it just because of maybe card rule reasons. Maybe Wolves had also some other reasons to develop the Bro Sports already. So he was the one player who prevented that we, for the first time, had full agreements in our actions, but yeah, almost full agreement we had for this turn. And the player whose turn at the end got chosen was PV4, who was one of the players who just went for the 2 movies, maximizing culture production and then taking the reserves. One downside of developing pro sports is also that it prevents us from developing democracy, which potentially could be an interesting option for us. And then we will keep the impact of architecture, war, the tactical colonization card. The impact of competition is drawn. Now those arenas might get even more valuable. At the moment, no player has really a lot of units, so it's even slightly good for us already. And with every arena, we might now get tons of points with the impact of architecture, competition, the internet, the cultural production from Pierre. So building as many arenas as possible might now be a very nice goal for the rest of the game. DANeo went for oil here, interestingly, which could be a little bit of an indicator that there are some impacts that help with it, because just for the production alone, maybe it's a bit too late, so there could be impact of industry coming, maybe impact of balance if he goes for one more farm upgrade could be in there, so that could be an indicator for some of those impacts. He goes for another journalism. Darwin at this point is producing him 6 additional culture production, which is really strong. He has saved a lot of civil actions, so while Cook is doing some very big work for us, I also think Darwin and also Shakespeare, of course, did some really big work, and both of our opponents did a very nice job of, at this point, still being completely in the game. It's completely not clear who will win at this point. DANeo will then take the reserves, takes the urban growth, and plays the reserves for resources. Now it's Majondor's turn, and Majondor seeds. The Ravages of Time are revealed. We will lose the Colossus. That was also one of our seeded events. Majondor has now only 5 civil actions, so he will go for some upgrades, goes for flaming, takes the military build-up to be a bit safer for the military, which might be an important choice, because with the military theory coming down the road, with us having the shock troops, there was actually the consideration of potentially going into military theory tanks and going for one shock troop tactic. So Majondor may be doing an important pick here with taking the military build-up. Now it is our turn. The question is, did anyone go with this warplay? And the answer is no, all agreed on seeding the impact of architecture, and I do think it's the correct choice. DANeo, with having the option of getting air forces, plus maybe cannons out, and Marlene can just go for a tactic with air forces, could defend the war, and Majondor, I do think, can't defend the war without help from the developments. But the thing is, there could still be help from the developments, and it would only be a small war, and I think just making our internet as big as possible is too important, so all players agreed here that it is the best choice to seed the impact of architecture. So that event is seeded, and a Cold War is revealed, which actually gives us quite some new options for this turn, because before the Cold War it was not possible to develop both the democracy and the pro sports, while now this is an option, and it's actually a very interesting option. And now, for this turn, there was again quite a bit of variety. Actually, there were almost only different turns suggested. Also, at this point, we lost one of our Hydra members, because Watsinians at this point was on holidays at a part of the world where there was no access to Discord. So, with that, he didn't take part from this point on any longer. And yeah, so we had a lot of different turns this turn, and one important thing to think about is, of course, will the age end or not? And if we take a card from the row, I do think it's relatively easily for DANeo to end the age, and with his opponents having the Hollywood and the internet, maybe it is in his interest. Maybe it is not, but it's definitely possible that the age will end, so I do think at this point it's very important to prepare for a turn that would be very strong if the age would end. Even if we don't take any cards from the row, it is still possible for DANeo to end the age because of Darwin. And I do think a line that many players went with, even though in different variations, was to set up for a lot of arenas at the next turn. I, for example, went with a turn where I disbanded one knight, same as we are seeing here. I elected Pierre because I thought it is more likely than not that the age will end and that we don't have another shot at getting the Olympic Games, and saving the civil action from is actually also relevant with all of the stuff that we want to do. So disbanding a knight, electing PR, developing democracy, developing pro sports, building 2 pro sports already this turn, 1 with the population of having disbanded a knight, 1 with the population of having disbanded a mine. Cengiz went with almost the same turn as I am, but disbanded a farm instead. However, with I didn't see any a good project for the 2 additional resources, because we have just enough with my line to go for 4 arenas, so I rather wanted to keep the farm to at least not be that bad prepared for impact of balance in agriculture, which could be impacts that definitely could be worrying for us. So I went with 2 arenas this turn, with electing Pierre, with going for democracy, and at the next turn we can go for 2 more arenas and finish the internet. It would have been also possible to go for another movie this turn, maybe maximizing the culture production for this turn, but then we can only go for 2 arenas, because each movie costs twice as much as 1 arena, so for 1 movie we have to miss out on 2 arenas with the amount of resources that we have available. So I just felt like going for arenas this turn and then starting to build some should be the best way. And there were also quite some players who went with such a line. Martin went with building 2 arenas, all with maybe some slightly different variations. The Wolves, I think, even went with building 3 arenas already this turn, and was willing to disband also a religion in order to achieve that. We then had some players who went with developing democracy and going for 1 movie, and then maybe only being able to go for 2 arenas at the next turn. There was Irene, who made the decision to go for a mechanized agriculture and front 1 upgrade. Also Lambda went with this decision, which helps us for impact of balance in agriculture. I definitely considered it, because those impacts are some weaknesses in our civilization, but I just think every arena is worth so much points with the impact of architecture and competition, that I was not willing to make our miss out on even only 1 arena in order to maybe go for a mechanized agriculture upgrade. There was Dropy, who I think took impact the mechanized agriculture, the efficient upgrade, and also the military theory, in order to then go for a relatively cheap upgrade at the next turn, while still being able to make the internet relatively big. So a lot of variations, a lot of different plans for the last turn. Also most of the players went for the military theory here, because if that one is not taken, first of all, it can be nice for ourselves, for some impacts. Impact of progress would be a lot better with it. Maybe there's an impact of government in there. But if we don't take it, there's maybe some danger. DANeo can go for it, can go for cannons, go for war potentially, and also maybe if we don't take enough cards, which was a thing that Dropy worried about, it could be that he can take military theory in air forces, and then if we don't have the military theory ourselves, he can set up for a really big war if he has one. But on the other hand, we have actually drawn a lot of wars, so only 1 war vocation, 1 hybrid war we don't have knowledge about, and with that, maybe the danger of war is not that big, even though of course still there if DANeo has drawn 1 and maybe having a nice tactic available. So a lot of variations. Basically, like the turn before, there was no turn chosen 2 times. Only Cengiz went with a very slightly different variation from my turn, with only the difference being disbanding a farm instead of disbanding a mine. And now here maybe some unfortunate thing happens, because here I think this turn will end up being a mistake. And at the end here, the Wheel of Doom made the decision to choose PV4's turn, and PV4's turn is mainly strong if the game continues for another round, and he also made sure for that to be more likely to happen and with not taking any cards from the row, which makes it definitely a bit tricky for DANeo to end the age. And first, PV4 also forgot about DANeo having Darwin and thought that the age could go on forever, but he noticed it before the turn was played, and before, thought that maybe DANeo doesn't have that big of an interest in ending the age, and with that still let the turn be like it is, with the risk of maybe the age ending. And I do think just because there is the chance of the age ending, a turn has to be submitted that just is strong and the age ends. For example, the double arena turns I do think are also perfectly fine. If the age continues, then we can make impact of architecture and competition maybe even bigger and set up for some other impacts potentially. So I do think the advantage that the turn of PV4 has for maybe another round is not big enough to outweigh the potential culture loss that it brings with itself in case the game should end immediately, which DANeo can achieve thanks to Darwin. And here the turn that is chosen is disbanding a knight, using the military action, then going for the democracy, increasing the culture reduction, playing the reserves for food, which is on one hand an understandable thing to do because every additional population is nice, but also as said, every 4 resources will mean an additional arena, which gives a lot of points. So I definitely was willing, even though it hurts for some impacts, to just destroy more instead of getting an additional population to get as many arenas as possible instead of using the reserves for food. And then there's a 4th movie build, another farm build, which helps for some impacts, allows for an additional population at the next turn, and the tanks are taken. And then the Pro Sports already developed. Pierre is not elected. And at the next turn we have 18 resources, just enough for 1 arena and the internet. We have this additional movie, so it's still a fine internet, but especially with impact of architecture and competition being in there, just being on 4 arenas and 3 movies at the next turn I think is a lot better than being at 4 movies and 1 arena. So I think this turn I will also talk about it when we are at the end, about what we can take away from this project. And one thing I can maybe mention it already is that, of course, especially with not being able to play out those turns, figuring out those H3 turns is extremely difficult. PV4 also mentioned that he was on holiday when he submitted this turn, and just maybe with not being able to play out those turns had some difficulties with figuring out the right choice, and maybe with already having figured out a turn where he thought that maybe the H can't end, he then thought maybe it can be a fine turn anyway. But I do think it is a turn that will end up being quite costly for us, maybe even more than first has to be expected, because I do think if the H should now end, being at more arenas just would have been more points, but now things will happen that will make it even more costly for us to go for this line, because with going for Pro Sports we would have been the strongest after our turn. Now we are the weakest, and unfortunately the last event in the deck is the international negotiations, and that means that Majondor DANeo can let us pay something to Majondor, and he will use resources, meaning now we can't even build an arena, we can just finish the internet, and that will make the internet a lot less big compared to having a lot of arenas. And so being here the weakest instead of the strongest is also quite unfortunate. Of course, we didn't have knowledge about this event, so that's now especially unfortunate, but makes our last turn now a lot less good. But there's maybe still the hope that DANeo makes the decision to not end the H, but with us maybe having left us in a position where we are not that nicely prepared for our last turn, I do think it's just a good thing for him to do, to take all of those cards, and then without even too much trouble he has the ability to end the H, and with that we have only 1 last turn ahead of us in our Hydra game. H4 starts. When we take a look at the culture overview, we can see that we have catched up the culture deficit at this point, but now our internet is not that big, and Majondor will get a bigger Hollywood. DANeo's spaceflight is also very decent. He might have some nice impacts in there. Our impact of architecture and competition is actually not as strong as it could have been, so things are going a bit tough for us, and especially the impact of tech might actually end up being nice for DANeo. The impact that is revealed is the impact of progress. As I mentioned, with him taking civil service and satellites, that just seemed like a very likely impact to be in there. Majondor goes for the democracy, gets a culture boost with that, builds a religion, finishes the Hollywood, is now at 38 points with the Hollywood, and gets a lot of culture for his last turn. Now, for one last time, the Hydra players had to think about what to do. And first of all, about the politics phase, there was maybe some consideration about seeding impact of science and playing for second, but no one wanted to go for that. Maybe after having such a strong position, now playing for second place is bad, but also there is still some hope that we can finish first place, and players decided to go to play towards that. And the impact that we decided to seed, there was full agreement, was the impact of competition. Unfortunately, us being weakest instead of strongest gets even more punished. Maybe that event was seeded by DANeo after seeing that we got weak and that we need all of our resources to finish the internet. Maybe he was then willing to, if he had knowledge about the international negotiations, seed the impact of strength into the deck. and now it gets revealed immediately. Maybe it was also seeded by Majondor, I don't know it, but it's of course now a very unfortunate event for us, and we could have been strongest here. Maybe then the impact of strength wouldn't be in the deck, but of course that would also be quite strong for us. And then we have our last turn ahead of us, and of course, at first look, maybe it just feels best to finish the internet. It still is a wonder that gives us, I think, 26 points. But at this point, with those impacts in there, those arenas are just extremely valuable. We can build 3 arenas if we destroy some stuff. Go for Pierre, then every arena is giving us 2 culture reduction, so 3 arenas give 6 culture reduction. 3 arenas give 9 points for the impact of architecture that's in there, so we are at 15, and 9 points for the impact of competition that it is in there, so that is 24, only 2 points less than finishing the internet would be. That being said, we have probably to spend 1 night, so it's already 3 points less. But the thing is, with just building all of those arenas, we maybe have a shot at out of the sudden winning something like Impact of Culture with overtaking Majondor, and it definitely could have been that Majondor maybe at his last push seeded the Impact of Culture, with seeing that we actually need all of our resources to finish the internet. He does know that those 2 impacts, Impact of Architecture and Competition, are actually seeded by us, and that is the only reason why building those arenas is even an option compared to finishing the internet. And with that, I think maybe it should have been worth it to play towards the Impact of Culture. If the Impact of Strength wouldn't have been revealed yet, it would have been even better. Then we would have also been nicely prepared for the Impact of Strength. Now it's basically only the Impact of Culture, and of course the impact that we have knowledge about. And the majority also went with going for all of those arenas. 6 players went with Disbanding Knight, increasing population, destroying a mine, so getting 3 new pops like the population like this, and then just building 3 arenas, electing Pierre, developing the tanks. But two players skipped this round because of holidays, Watson Jensen PV4, and then 2 went with finishing the wonder and developing a technology, and then Wolf's turn was chosen, which was also one of those turns. Which is of course also perfectly fine, just scoring us more safe culture, but at this point we will be quite behind. Our impacts are fine, but maybe not that strong, and it is just looking like we might have to hope for something in order to still have a shot at winning this game, and I think maybe the impact of culture could be such a thing to hope for, but if it isn't in there, then finishing the internet will be the better play. So then just the tanks got developed, some technology is taken, and that is our last turn. And yeah, I do think the internet could have been gone up to more than 40 points potentially, or at least 40 points, so it's now quite unfortunate being able to finish it only for 26 points. DANeo seeds and the impact of harmony is revealed. That one is at least an event where we are somewhat nicely prepared for. Also, that would have been worse in case we would have gone for those 3 arenas, so far Wolf's decision definitely was the one that paid off more. DANeo will go for some technologies, finishes the spaceflight for 33 points, so that ended up being the 2nd best wonder out of the 3 that were built. A lot of strong wonders built at the end. DANeo will increase his population, place the reserves for resources, dispense the Rifleman. Now that the impact of harmony is out, it won't get punished that much, only by the impact of competition. He will build some theaters, gets more culture reduction, and then ends his turn. And then, before the final impacts, we are already quite a bit behind, as you can see, 17 behind DANeo, 19 behind Majondor, so now we have to see if maybe we will be able to catch up to one of them, or maybe even still to both, and then have a shot at winning the game. We have at least some decent impacts in there, but let's see if those will be strong enough. The first impact to see is the impact of government, which is sadly not that great for us. Then we have the impact of technology that was seeded by us. It's now very strong for DANeo. It gives us a lot of points against Majondor, but it makes it that we are even more behind DANeo. There's the impact of competition, which is now only slightly better for us, with sadly not being able to build any arena. We have the impact of architecture, which also could have been potentially bigger, but at least it still gives us +6 points against Majondor, so we are only 5 points behind him now. Maybe there's at least a 2nd place still possible for the Hydra. But the last impact is actually the impact of agriculture, which at least gives us +7 thanks to having built a farm, and we get a bit more points for this impact, but at the end it is not enough, and we actually finish at the last position. So yeah, at the end the game is actually lost, and yeah, I think we maybe we had a strong position, but maybe no, just didn't play it ideally at the end. I do think one big thing to blame is, of course, Marta, who already, when we got the Suez Canal, said the game is already over. And then during H3, still was convinced that we would win by quite a big amount of points. One thing that maybe changed, or which one reason why maybe there was some differences on thinking how good our chances are on a peaceful finish, are maybe on I think some players expected to be that there will be one additional round, not in this last round, but before, when we did those calculations. So with an additional round, maybe we would have had better chances. And now, at the end, we are quite a bit behind, but I do think going for all of those pro spots would have really scored us a lot of additional points for both of those impacts. For the internet, we would have gotten the Olympic Games from Pierre. So I do think that we could have had some chances to win this game in a peaceful way. But sadly, we won't know it for certain, because the opponents might have played differently. Then I think it could have been still enough. The impact of strength either wouldn't be in there, or maybe would be won by us, or our opponents would have to put some additional effort into winning it, and we would have gotten 40 points internet with 4 arenas, which would really score us a lot of points for those impact that we have seeded. And yeah, so of course the second last turn was an unfortunate one, but it's of course really difficult to figure out those turns just by looking at it. So that was also one feedback that I definitely got at the end. But first of all, we have of course to say that yeah, very, very well played by DANeo and Majondor. Both of them did a really, really great job of staying the game, not losing hope against all our crazy culture cook Suez setup, which maybe really looked like it will be very tough to beat. We had a lot of luck in the early game with the event ordering, with all of those colonies coming after we having committed to Isabella and the Colossus. And but DANeo with going for Darwin, lots of civil actions, and Majondor with going for Shakespeare in Hollywood. At the end, both finished before us. So very, very well played by them. Congratulations to DANeo for winning this game. And yeah, let's maybe do some final thoughts now that we are at the end of this game. First of all, I think it was a very, very interesting and fruitful project to have going on. Seeing all of those different suggested turns, seeing what other players would do, and then afterwards discussing it with a lot, being able to discuss about those moves with the strongest players that there are in this game, just was an awesome experience. And I do think also all of the participants found it very nice having those discussions ongoing, seeing the different lines that were chosen, sometimes also getting a little bit into a heated discussion, but all remained very civiled. So I do think that was a very nice experiment. And no, I do think some things that made it a little bit harder for the Hydra was, on one hand, the one thing that I mentioned, that I was the only one who was able to play out the turns when I thought about a turn. The others just had to figure it out with taking a look at it. And while those are, of course, all strong players, it is still easy to then maybe miss a little detail, do a little mistake in the calculations, and it's just easier to just look at a turn and then maybe see what consequences this has for the next turn, with all of those stats being automatically adjusted. So I do think that was maybe one thing that maybe made some 8 turns a little bit more difficult to figure out for all of my fellow Hydra participants. And then I think what we also saw a little bit during at the end of H2 and in H3 was the lack of maybe the lack of the strategic abilities of long-term planning. We kind of switched between going for a bit of military, then taking movies, democracy, and internet, and not going for this blunder after having gone for the military. So maybe some slightly more inefficient turns that were more coherent to the overall strategy could have maybe already also made a difference. Like this, it was a little bit of a back and forth between going for a bit of military, but also just going for a completely peaceful play. And so I think that was something. So yeah, at the end, even though there were a lot of strong players participating, those were factors that maybe made life a little bit harder for us, and despite having a very strong position, which I think we maybe should have converted into a win, because with such a Suez Canal, no, I think that's just such a strong position. We got everything that we needed, but then we maybe started to make some minor misplays, probably also already early in the game. Definitely turns maybe where we could have chosen something different. So yeah, at the end, it sadly wasn't enough to win this game, but a very, very interesting project. I had a lot of fun. Thanks to all of the participants for participating. Thanks to Majondor and DANeo for being willing to be opponents in this game. Always playing their turns very quickly, even though we as the Hydra always took quite a while until our turn was submitted and then the random turn was chosen. So yeah, big thanks to all of the ones that were involved. And yeah, with that I think we are at the end of the video. I didn't take a look at the time, but I suspect that it will be a very, very long video. So now let's just bring it to an end. I am of course very interested to hear what are your thoughts about this project. What were you surprised to see? Were you surprised to see how many different turns there were suggested, or what were other things that you maybe found very interesting? And also, of course, what are maybe things that you would improve on how the overall thing was done? Would you maybe not pick a random turn? Would you maybe allow discussion before the turn? That is of course also very nice. I kind of had the idea of wanting to see how the players, what turns they came up with without being able to discuss the turns before, so which is why I only thought about or wanted to discussions afterwards, but of course that can be done in different ways. So if you have different ideas on how maybe at some point something like this can be repeated, definitely let me know. I hope I was somewhat able to get all of the information across. Probably it's a bit of a video that is too long now, but it's also a very special video, so I hope some of you at least made it here until the end, and all the things that I maybe have forgotten can maybe be just maybe some of the players who participated can fill in the gaps that I maybe of the things that I have forgotten about. Also thanks again to DANeo to already covering the game while it was ongoing. I think it was a nice opportunity to maybe follow the game already along while it was ongoing. A very nice idea of recording those videos. Alright, so with that we are at the end of my 1000 subscriber special video. I hope you had a lot of fun. The next videos that will be coming will again be World Championship videos. And with that I say thanks for watching, have a nice time, and see you in the next video.